Good morning, good day, good evening, wherever you are. This is The Line, SkepTalk. I'm Aaron. I'm here with Owen. Owen, how are you doing?
Doing well. You can hear me, right?
Loud and clear.
Awesome.
All right, if this is your first time coming in, SkepTalk, we tend to focus on things related to science and claims that are not so sciencey. If you think that you can debunk evolution, Big Bang Theory, magic, apparently our program manager for the evening is doing some black magic to keep the show going, but we're doing our best to be skeptical of his claims. We will see how it goes. But you can call in. You can either use the web link in the description or call 1-720-619-2288. We got a lot of other shows here on the line. So if you are enjoying this show, next week on Monday as well, we have SkepTalk again, but that will be with Shannon Q and Aaron Ra. This week, we also have several other programs besides SkepTalk. So tomorrow night, we got Chewed Gum with Elisa Lube and Erica Gibbon, better known as Gutsick Gibbon. We got the Hang Up on Thursday with Matt and Jimmy. Friday, then we got, or is that Thursday? I'm sorry. Thursday, we got TACIS with Josie and Ben. And then come Sunday, we got the Sunday shows in the afternoon and the evening. We got Forrest and Eve and Matt hosting those shows then. So if you like this, there's more. If you don't like me, don't worry, I'll get it out of your hair soon enough.
You're plenty.
So, Owen,
you don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know. I've been losing my ability to speak well. I'm still kicking myself a bit. I recently did a video with Paul Pelagia, and had a lot of the comments note that I mispronounced abiogenesis pretty well.
Really? How did you pronounce it? Or do you remember? Or?
They nicely phonetically spelled it out in the comments. Abiogenesis.
Is that how it's supposed to be said? I've been saying abiogenesis this whole time.
I am 99% sure abiogenesis is the best pronunciation, and I allowed my tongue to not think right.
Oh, okay. I see. Got it. Like atheist,
So,
abiogenesis. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. By turning into abiogenesis, it's now an Irish woman with an interest in biology.
Yeah. Right. Okay. That's good.
All right. So I'm embarrassed. Oh well. I'm trying to confirm with Forrest if there's any other biologists who make the same mistake as me, so I can feel 1% better.
Oh, no doubt. There's no doubt.
Yeah. And of course, I should say, does anyone pronounce it that way without 2 shots of vodka?
Right.
I should put that caveat in. All right. So this is a call-in show, and we got a couple of callers set in. So as a quick note, we try to give extra priority to theist callers. So, we try to go in order, but theist callers, we try to bump up. And so we got a couple people waiting, and we do have a theist. So, Owen, shall we hop into the fun?
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you want to activate or me?
I'm happy to. But like I say, keep your thumb over the mute button in case we need to keep things a little bit under control. So let us bring in Anthony, pronouns he, him, from Virginia. He's going to be talking about intelligent design is not God of the gaps, inference to the best explanation instead. So, Anthony, are you hearing us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okie doke, yes.
Is the audio good? Because I've had audio problems in the past. Is it crackling or anything? Or?
Yeah, it's crackling a little bit, but I think we're okay for the most part.
A little bit. All right, tell me if it gets too bad. Yeah, so like you said, I've heard many atheists, skeptics, what have you, make the argument that intelligent design is a sophisticated God of the gaps argument. But I want to suggest that actually that is incorrect. It is an inference to the best explanation. Okay, I wanted to make that argument.
All right. Okay, so that's the argument you want to make. So let's just make sure, though, that we're on the same page. You're going to be comparing that to evolution by natural selection, along with the other mechanisms of genetic drifts, sexual selection, etc., right?
Right.
And before we even hop into intelligent design, another big part of evolution is common descent. So are you going to say that there's intelligent design and common descent, or are you going to see the two as opposed? We just want to see where you want to go with this.
I'm coming at it more from like a special creation side of things, that animals are not related by common descent beyond like maybe the genus level or species.
And okay, so basically all creatures within the genus level can be related and have common descent, but once you go beyond that, then you don't think we can ascribe common descent.
Correct.
Why?
For a number of reasons. And again, I didn't want to make that specific argument, but I believe that the genetic code prevents mutations beyond a certain limit. At some point, it becomes too degenerative. But I think genetic mutations can create diversity within a population, and there can be speciation events, but it basically can't progress beyond a certain point because of the gene regulatory networks and the development of the organism from a zygote to a fully developed organism.
I feel like you lost me here. Let's just step back to, why is it that you think that they can't progress beyond speciation?
Yeah, because there are limitations to. It's like if you think about the genetic code as kind of like a computer program. Like if you made a couple.
Not. I mean,
it's not.
That's an analogy, but it simplifies it so much that you cannot compare them at a level that we would need in a debate. It's something that you'd say to like a 6-year-old to explain super basically how it works. But okay, so go on. You were saying
yeah, there are differences between the genetic code and a computer program, obviously, but it's essentially the same idea. Where you have
all right, go ahead.
The genetic code codes for specific sequences of, among other things, of amino acids and protein chains and things like that. And essentially, you can make minor modifications to it, just like you can a computer code. But the more you make, the more it degenerates the code, and at some point it breaks down to the point where the original program is no longer functional. So that's what we see happen. That's actually what we see happening in nature.
Here's the thing, though. That assumes original functionality, and honestly, that's assuming the premise that you want to conclude with.
Well, they do have functions, so we can't deny that.
But when you say original function, that's assuming that there's actually like something that everything was like made for, which is basically sneaking in the designer right at the beginning of your argument, which you're trying to actually get to.
Well, that is kind of what we observe, is that when you're looking at the various proteins and the organs and things like that, they do have a function that it looks like they are designed for, and there's no reason to think otherwise. So why would we think that? Why would we think the eye has anything? Yeah.
Go ahead. You go.
Why would we look at the eye and say its function isn't to see?
I think that what he's saying, correct me if I'm wrong here, is that there's like you are implying that there is an overall function to begin with. Like from the start, you're assuming that we had to have started here with this. And I don't like using the computer code analogy because it does not stand up when we're talking about this. I was a programmer for 6 years. I'm not a biologist, though. Anyway, I think the point is that computer code, if we follow that analogy, starts with like a whole, a 1,000,000-line banking software, and these pieces do this and those pieces do that and everything else, and you are tweaking and changing little parts of it to kind of follow the analogy that you're presenting here. But evolution didn't really work that way. We started from nothing and built up little by little by little, and each subsequent change changed the way that the entire system functioned. The changes that were not beneficial, those lines died off. The ones that were beneficial, those lines continued to reproduce. I don't understand how you accept speciation, but can't accept that it can take an additional step and an additional step and additional with time. I mean, how old do you think the Earth is? You think that over like 2 million years this doesn't happen, or?
Yeah, actually, I've seen arguments in mathematics suggesting that even if the Earth was trillions of years old, that we would never get the kind of genetic diversity that we see on Earth today. So
Well, that's
billions of
simply
years.
Those arguments are made, but there's almost like a law of the universe that if a creationist makes a probability argument, it's wrong.
Well, it's basic math, so if it doesn't matter if it's a creationist
And if they do the basic
making
math
it or
wrong, that is basically wrong. It's always the thing, garbage in, garbage out. Doesn't matter how simple or complex the math is. If the premises going into it are wrong, the conclusion cannot be trusted.
Yeah, and that's correct. I guess I would just say, based on the arguments I've seen, I haven't seen a valid refutation of what they're saying. I'd be willing to listen to an argument. I have. I haven't. I mean, I've looked at I think that a lot of evolutionists are ignoring, for the most part, or kind of straw manning what is actually being argued.
Okay, so let me ask you then. Let's kind of break this down into like a more manageable system. You're saying that you've heard arguments about this. Let's break it down into a syllogism. Can you give me your premises and the conclusion that you reached based on those premises? I assume the conclusion is intelligent design is real, or let me simplify. Let's say the conclusion is evolution does not work beyond simple speciation, like one degree of speciation, I suppose. How do you get there? Let's take one step at a time. What are your premises to get there?
All right. So let's start with step one. You start now. I know according to evolution, it didn't start this way, but as we observe it now, let's just say you have a perfectly functional genome. Okay. And let's say it mutates by.
All right.
Yeah. And let's say it mutates by, let's just throw a number out there, 1%. Okay. And so that creates we're just using numbers here. So that creates a 1% different animal organism, whatever have you, and it creates a new population. Okay. Let's just say that was a speciation event. All right. So you have the original perfect genome, and then you have the slightly mutated 99% similar genome.
All right.
The problem is once you get, let's just say, past let's say 98% of what the original mutations compared to what the original genome sequence was, the organisms are no longer viable. Okay. So
all right. So that's your.
Here's the thing. That's not. We can actually know instantly that's impossible, because if you're saying that's not viable, then that means that life should not be possible except for things within 1 or 2% of species that we know. And here's the thing. We're like only a couple percent different from chimps. And I think we can agree chimps exist. They're not degenerate creatures. They are doing just fine, but they're just a few percent different from us. So this whole idea that get a few percent away from our genome and then it just doesn't work is just false by our eyes, honestly.
Yes, and so it sounds like we've changed the conclusion a little bit. We started evolution can't reach beyond 1 degree, and we ended up with when you get past 98% differences, life isn't viable. That's a better kind of breakdown, I think, of a conclusion. So you're saying, here are the premises I wrote, you have a perfectly functional genome. If it mutates by 1%, conclusion, it isn't viable beyond 1%. There's a lot missing here. we need something to tell us why. Like, why do you believe this? Like, you've explained your beliefs,
because
but
they've done mutagenesis experiments, and these were evolutionary. They did mutagenesis experiments on fruit flies and a number of different nematodes and a number of different types of organisms. And this is what they discovered: is that when you mutate the genomes too much, I don't know their names, but the papers are out there. I mean, the fruit fly experiment.
I'll take, instead of names, I will take the name of the study. Even give me anything, and I will search it up right now, and we'll find it. You have anything, any kind of like keyword I can search to find any of these?
Yeah, so something that was done decades ago were the fruit fly experiment. Okay, where they bombarded fruit flies. They bombarded fruit flies with radioactive energy and things like that in order to induce genetic changes, all right, in the genome. And what they found was that it produced a number of variations as expected. All of them were degenerative, and the fruit flies, first of all, never changed into anything besides fruit flies, which is what they were hoping for. Okay.
Actually, no, and I'll just stop you right there, because that tells me you don't even know what evolution is. We will never, on evolution, we will never stop being humans, no matter how much we evolve, because anything that comes after us is one of our descendants. This has always been the case for evolution. You don't change from one kind of animal to another kind. So when you say that, Anthony, you are showing you really don't know what evolution is. And if you think that's what evolution we're looking for with these fruit fly experiments, you just have not read the study. You've read somebody's propaganda about it.
And also, the fruit fly study is not valuable at all, because bombarding them with radiation to induce mutations is not the same as evolution, really, at all. But we do have proper studies. Well, it isn't. I simply disagree, good sir. We have studies, for example, on E. coli evolving brand new traits or whatever to be able to consume different substances when it couldn't previously. And the reason that the E. coli study is so valuable is because E. coli has very short life cycles, hours, I think, like 12 hours or something. We can do this over the course of 30 years and watch as literal evolution takes place. So fruit fly study, not useful to us at all in any way. Do you have another study that kind of backs up? Because, bombarding with radiation is not a good way of coming to conclusions here on this subject.
Well, at that time, I think these experiments were done, and maybe even as far back as the 30s. I can't remember exactly when, but at the time, that was the best they had. And the idea was based in evolution. It was based in evolutionary theory, which is the idea that evolution is basically progressed by mutations in the genome. So scientists use whatever means they have to create mutations, as many as they can, and see what happens, see if a new lineage appears. And what they found is that just like we've always observed, they were able to create a number of different variations of fruit flies, but they weren't able to create anything beyond a fruit fly that was viable.
Right. Here's the thing, and again, on evolution, flies will not evolve into hamsters or vice versa. That is never going to happen on evolution. You don't evolve out of your ancestry. That's the whole point, is that it's descent with modification. So we show the signs of our past ancestors, and that'll be the case no matter how many more millions of years humans get to stick around, if we're good enough to be able to be around that long. And I say if we're good enough because most species don't last millions of years. And of course, we have atomic weapons to even end that faster. And I'm hoping we're not that stupid. But we came close a few too many times.
See, that's something I don't understand why you make that claim, because according to evolution, we all evolved from a single-celled organism. So we're certainly not a single-celled organism.
Here's the thing. Anymore. Guess what? We are composed of cells. Single-celled organisms are just that. It's one cell. Multi-celled organisms, lots of cells. But we did not evolve from anything that's like a modern bacteria. We have a common ancestor that was cellular.
Yeah, and the study you're referencing, I didn't actually realize this, but it was done by Thomas Hunt Morgan, and it was done to validate eugenics, actually. Thomas Hunt Morgan was, there's a big eugenics movement in the United States at the time, 20s, early 30s. It was taking hold in Germany, and I believe the dude was hired by Columbia Law School, and he realized that evolution and everything, it's just way more complicated than people expected it to be. And he said, this is like a dead end. This is just a scientific dead end. And he quit because of that. And I think Columbia continued on. But anyway, the point is that the fruit fly study is not useful for this conversation. Do you have a different study that that kind of validate
I think it is.
this conclusion?
I think it's well. If you look at these people who did this, they were evolutionists. They were trying to prove evolution, and I think they realized that their results weren't what they wanted. So that's why they gave up. But that's
okay, I don't know about what they were up to, or I think they were trying to validate eugenics, not evolution. Yeah. But okay,
and I'm going to say, Anthony, it's really hard to impugn their character and say what you think they were doing or what they rejected when you didn't even know what decade the study was in or who ran it. I really don't like to impute motive onto people if I don't even know who they are.
Well, these are things I remember. Yeah, these are details. So it's I remembered that their explicit purpose was to prove evolution true, and they ended up realizing they couldn't do it.
Well, conversely, though, Owen had mentioned the E. coli experiment, and just to give some details there, that's particularly run by Richard Lenski at Michigan State University, my alma mater. Go green, go white. Sorry, a little bit of school pride there. But this is an experiment that's been going on, I think since at least the 90s, and basically able to show, I think you can get new generations of this E. coli in a matter of hours. And he has not just the newest strands of the E. coli that he puts in different circumstances to see how they evolve under different traits, but also has the original samples. So he can go check their DNA of the original sample and, show here's, has all the old versions, able to test them out and say, here's all the different changes in the genome that led to the traits that they have. And of course, you have their entire ancestry. And the idea that he has found some point saying, after this point, no, the E. coli can't evolve anymore. Everything continues to evolve to try to best fit its circumstances. And this is just, one of those seminal experiments that's been going on for a long time. And honestly, I think you should know more about it because it's just so well conducted and so well documented.
I know all about Lenski. Yeah, I know that one very well. And one reason is because a lot of creationists are actually claiming victory in that one as well because
they're liars.
Well, again, this is another individual. I don't think he stated this explicitly, but this is certainly someone. Well, yes, it was an explicit aspect of this experiment. They wanted to demonstrate evolution, and I'm sure they thought.
So he demonstrates it. That's pretty good.
Well,
it's like complaining. Galileo shows that things fall at the same rate by going to the Tower of Pisa and dropping things. That's just a backwards, non-scientific thing. It's like, no, he literally went to test evolutionary predictions and saw, hey, he actually came out well.
He absolutely did prove evolution with that study. And you know what? One more thing. I'm sorry. With the fruit fly thing and with this, evolution wasn't proven to be true through the fruit fly study, but that doesn't mean that it's false because the fruit fly study did not prove it to be true. If I don't find a black swan in my backyard, it doesn't mean that they don't exist. It means that I didn't find one. If I go to Australia and I find a black swan or something, that would prove that black swans are real. There's a false negative versus a false positive type of deal.
Well,
but anyway.
I wasn't making the case that it disproved evolution. What I was showing is it demonstrates that as far as we know, okay, so this would be, I guess, an inductive argument, maybe. More, of course.
Well, when you say as far as we know, I have a genetics question for you then. Are you familiar with endogenous retroviruses?
Yeah, I'm quite familiar with that argument as well.
When you say quite familiar, so tell me about what you think this is about, especially because you're saying, this argument, not like these facts, but this argument, because this tells me that you're already coming to this in the wrong way. But go ahead.
Well, I guess the idea is that in the evolutionary history of various organisms, viruses inserted themselves into the DNA and then became a part of that genome, and then it was passed down to the various lineages, and we can kind of see the evolutionary histories based on these endogenous viral elements in the genomes of species and organisms around in the world. I think that's kind of summarized it, unless I'm wrong.
Basically, though, I believe the injections of the retrovirus DNA in the genome is mostly inactive, that it mostly doesn't do anything. It's just kind of a leftover fossil rather than actually being used by the organism for encoding proteins. At least I believe that's the general case. But that's a detail that we'll see if it matters or not. But the basic idea, yeah, somewhere in the past of a lineage, there was an injection, and the ancestors of that creature carried on that injection site, as you can see in their genome. So do you know where I'm going to be going with this kind of evidence?
Well, usually they say that there's no reason that a designer would do something like this, I guess.
Well, that has
only
nothing
be
to
evidence
do
of
with
evolution.
it. Really. Yeah, I mean, it's not about a designer wouldn't have reason to do it. I think the point is, that is evidence that we have some connection or some relation to viruses and things, right? Because your argument is that we can't come from, or we can't be more than 98% or more than 2% different from other creatures, but we have retrovirus DNA in us, right? So setting aside whether a creator would leave that in us, what about that? What about that argument?
Well, I think the problem is that just like, evolutionists originally claimed there were all these vestigial organs, and now we know that there are basically none. I think that originally
Sorry, you don't know what vestigial means, so stop right there. What do you think vestigial means? And if you think it means useless, I'm going to tell you you're wrong.
Well, well, that's what the evolutionists used to say, is that it's an organ that was
so that's
useful.
Not what it means. Vestigial means that the feature no longer accomplishes or doesn't accomplish well its original or prior function. So the usual test case for that is the fact that whales have hip bones, which makes sense that they used to have legs back there, and well, now they don't walk around on land anymore. So the fact that there are these hips in the shapes of hips that could hold leg points there, even though there are different muscles attached to that point, why in the world would you expect a whale to have basically hips as if it were a land creature? That's something vestigial. Not that it's useless, that it no longer fulfills a prior function in its history.
Well, again, we're going into interpretations. The supposed hip bones.
Can you say why you would find hips in a whale if that was intelligently designed?
I'm trying to explain that. They're not actually hip bones. That's something that evolutionists made up.
They just look like hip bones.
They don't even look like hip bones. They have a.
Have you ever looked at a whale bone? Have you looked at them?
I've seen pictures of them. Okay, I've seen pictures. I've never dissected a whale and seen their hip bone, but I've seen pictures, and even biologists will admit that these structures, which in that area of the whale, have a very specific and very important function in modern whales. The modern whales reproductive
Did I say no function, or did I say not prior function? Because I was really explicit.
There's no reason to assume these structures ever did anything besides what they do now. None.
So why does it look like the whales have these dangly little legs in the back that look just like legs, that have the features of legs, that have, for example, that it has like digits, as if it had like fingers, as if it was just like a foot on a previous creature? If it's just there for attaching, but they do.
Are you kidding me? Did you just
They
say they
don't have-
don't?
This is what happens
there's-
when you don't actually go and look.
Are you saying that? Are you talking about external to the whale? They have little dangly leg things.
If you
I mean,
went and looked,
outside.
you'd see that.
I mean, there might be a picture on the internet that's like photoshopped, but I don't think that actually exists as a real thing.
Everything is fake
Go
except
to
for
a
like
museum and
your
see
head
the
is
whale.
bizarre. Nothing is real except for like what what's in your head and what you believe, and we live in the matrix and everything, right? Nothing is believable. There's an ice wall out there preventing us from like leaving the flat earth and everything, right? Like that's that's the direction we're going right now. You're literally not believing factual information and because it's not useful to your argument.
I'm just saying
You don't believe in flat earth, do you?
I've never seen a whale with dangly legs. They might exist.
And you didn't
I
look.
just,
That's why I asked if you looked, and the answer is you didn't. And that's why you don't know.
well, I was speaking reference to the bone structure. Like as far as I have seen whales, like I've been whale watching, and I can say I never saw the dangly leg structures. That does. I mean, I'd be willing to be proven wrong, but I think even if I went on the internet, I probably wouldn't see anything that's meaningful. To be honest.
So you've already determined what the evidence is, even without looking at it. That is classic creationism. Oh boy.
Well, I'm just saying I don't think whales have dangly legs, little dangly leg structures.
Okay,
But
well,
The thing is,
I
you
might be
didn't
wrong.
even look.
I'm not a-
You didn't even look, and you're declaring what the evidence is, and saying that apparently evolutionists are liars and photoshopping images. Because boy, oh boy. Oh, Anthony, I don't know if you're able to see a screen right now, but Owen is screen sharing and showing a skeleton of perhaps a baleen whale. I'm not 100% sure, but showing the dangly bits there of the leg bones of a whale. Funny enough, this is actually on a creationist website.
Oh, is it really? That's funny. I'll check it. Yeah, there you
It's
go.
at ICR,
Good.
Institute for Creation Research.
So yeah,
Okay,
so
I
this
actually
creationist
can see
website that I was looking at acknowledges it.
Yeah, those are the bone structures. See, I think we're talking about different things. Those are the internal so-called hip structure we're discussing. Those are not hips. Those are
How do you know
bones.
they're not hips if you've never even seen them before? Don't tell me you know
Because-
what they are if you've never even looked. If you haven't looked, you can't say you know what they are.
And this
I have
website,
That's called
looked
lying.
this website acknowledges it.
I know, and the problem is the reason these aren't hips is because their function, their current function, is to support the reproductive system of whales. That's what
Anthony,
they do.
You fail to understand the whole point of vestigial organs, is that it doesn't have its prior function, but it shows the traces of that prior functionality. And I'm not saying, again, vestigial things don't have any current function. Because you will refuse to understand that, you will sit there and lie about these structures. And I'm saying you are lying about it because you are telling me what is there when you have never even looked. From your own admission, you have never even looked. You knew nothing about this, and yet you will declare that you know what they are and aren't, and that evolutionists are photoshopping these images, even though we literally just pulled them from a creationist website. My goodness, Anthony, I don't believe we can have a conversation if you are going to lie there and pretend to things you know when you haven't even looked. That's the worst form of bullshitting. I can't. Ooh, I need to calm down. Calm. Zen.
No,
Let's back up. Let's back up.
All right, okay.
No, the problem is that you're lying. So let's actually try to back up. Let's go back to endogenous retroviruses.
What lie have I told? What lie have I told?
You lied that you had any knowledge about these hip bones, and you didn't even know they existed. You had never even looked at them. You knew nothing about them, and you declared that they were photoshopped.
No, the photoshopping. See, you made an argument that they had like external like leg appendages on the outside of a whale. No, that's what I was talking about. That's what I thought you were talking about. But the bones, there are bones within.
You said the only evidence you would find of what I was talking about is if an evolutionist photoshopped it.
Right.
You're the one who used the word
photoshopped. You didn't show me that. That's not what
because
you just
we showed you the actual images, so you lied. You lied about what was there without even looking at it, and declared that you know better about it. So like I say, I'm going to try to put us back on a slightly different path, and let's back up a little bit. let's go back to endogenous
All right.
retroviruses because we weren't, I think, finishing that point. So the whole point with that is there is some injection at some point in the past by some sort of virus, and part of the reason we can tell that is we can go in the genome, find that sequence, and say, hey, this matches the sequence of such and such virus, and it's otherwise not doing any sort of other notable protein making function in that creature. Often you can see that there's actually some level of decay because there isn't a perfect match, because if something is not being used, it's usually not conserved in terms of evolution. So these are the sorts of things that you can tell and look for, the signs of these endogenous retrovirus injections. Is there anything I'm saying right now you would object to?
Well, no, I understand this is what the scientists are claiming, but again, this is what my argument was going to be, that this is all comes down to a matter of interpretation, just like vestigial organs, because first of all, they are finding functions for these what were originally thought useless aspects of the genome, and I believe that as more research, I believe as more research is done, we will discover that these so-called endogenous retroviruses are actually just functional pieces of DNA.
They just happen to be identical to the DNA we find in viruses?
From what I understand, and I may be incorrect about this, that claim itself is they resemble viral DNA, but it's not an exact match.
So wait, what you're saying is you could have differences between two things, and even just a little bit of difference, and it's still totally viable DNA? Well, guess what? That just threw out your previous argument about degeneracy, because now you're saying, hey, this thing just looks similar to this thing. They have completely different functions, but they still work in creatures. Oh, it looks like you can have massive changes in creatures, even with small changes to DNA. I don't see any degeneracy at this point. I think you just undid your own argument by consistency's sake.
No. I'm just, when you're looking at ERGs, the scientists overstate the similarity between these gene sequences.
When you say the scientists, name
viruses.
Because here's the thing: if you're going to go and start disparaging, let's start naming names. Tell me what they are saying that is false, and who is saying these false things.
Anyone, all the scientists who are talking about these ERGs.
All the scientists are liars. Yeah. So remember that, everyone.
Not all of them.
For Anthony to be right, all scientists have to be liars. No, you said all of them. Now, of course, you're a liar, so you're going to change what you say as you go along. That's fine. So.
Well, I think that they're overstating the similarity between these gene sequences and what we observe in modern viruses. They're saying that they're retroviruses.
Now, here's the thing, though. We're not even getting to the point, though, is we don't just see endogenous retroviruses in our DNA. We see the same things also in other creatures. In particular, you can go and say, hey, there are some, but not all, endogenous retrovirus injections in chimps, for example. Chimps have some that we have. Chimps have some that we don't have. We have some that chimps have. We have some that chimps don't have. And the interesting thing is, not only are the endogenous retroviruses we have in common, they're also in the same place in the genome, which is what you would expect on common ancestry.
Right. Well, so whether they're endogenous retroviruses is an open question, but there's no doubt that we share similar gene sequences with all kinds of different organisms. Like we have very similar gene sequences to fish and amphibians and all kinds of things. So I think that what that could be is that the designer has found it useful, these gene sequences, so he puts them in a human, he puts them in an ape.
So common design, common designer?
Yeah. Why not?
Is that the argument? Common design, common designer?
Why not? Yes.
Yeah. I would say that makes sense.
Does that mean different design, different designer?
No, because you can have a designer design a car or a plane. You know.
So you're saying that whether they're the same or different, it's the same designer no matter what. That's what we call a crappy hypothesis. If the evidence, no matter what it is, can fit, you got bad science on your side.
Well,
it's completely meaningless.
Let's put it this way.
Not really.
Are you familiar? You mentioned eyes earlier. Have you? What do you know about the eye of the human? Do you know some of its oddities?
Yeah, I know that atheists claim that it's poorly designed for various reasons, but I don't think they're.
Now, can you name some of those features that look unusual for a well-designed eye, or like what are the things that quote-unquote atheists point to, as if like there's no Christians that also know about these features of the eyes.
I think that the location of the retina creates a blind spot, and atheists are saying they could make a better eye that doesn't have a blind spot or something along those lines. Is what I've heard.
It's that the basically all the nerves at the back of the eye are bunched up at the back, and so there's a spot where it's not actually photosensitive, and that's where your blind spot is.
Yeah, I don't see that. That's not a design flaw. That's
Then why don't octopuses have blind spots? Octopuses also have, or octopi, I'm not sure ever what the right plural is, but the octopus, octopodes is so I like sometimes, but an octopus has also a camera-like eye, but they don't have a blind spot. They don't have the same sort of structuring in that way. So not only could we design a better eye, we found it. So the question is, why did the designer give us the crappy eye? And yet somehow had a different design for the octopus.
Well, you have to. Well, here's the thing: if that eye is so superior to our eye, why didn't evolution God create it for us?
Evolution God.
Ask your God about this right now, because here's the thing: as we noted earlier, we don't evolve out of our ancestry, so your eye can't like pop out and redesign itself. That means we are kind of stuck with the dead ends along those ways, and they just get perpetuated indefinitely. The octopus had a different ancestry for how its eye developed, which is why it's different. This is actually one of the ways we can tell not only common ancestry, but where we can also see, hey, these guys didn't evolve from this other group over here, or their common ancestor has to go way further back in time. So these are the sorts of things that come along and say, hey, not only does evolution come along and produce the tree of life, but it also says why creatures over here have all these features in common, but not the features found in creatures over here, and so on. The fact that you can get that twin-nested hierarchy, which is really hard to explain on creationism, because, why can't we have wings on an elephant or what have you? The creationist God could do whatever he, she, it wanted.
So you're saying that at no point along our evolutionary history could evolution God fix this problem with the eye in human type organisms?
Look, I don't know what you mean by evolution God, but we did evolve a solution to that problem, which is to say our brains kind of censor it out. So the eye was not corrected, but our brain steps in to fill in that spot.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, how come it didn't rewire things so that there isn't this problem in the first place? Evolution couldn't have found
for us in effect. It's just really badly designed.
Well, if there isn't a problem, that means it's designed. The design is fine. So I don't see what
there's a blind spot, and it does affect us sometimes. Just doesn't affect us enough for it to, evolve out. Or certainly not soon.
That's what I'm
anyway.
saying, though. Why? I guess my question is, evolution is supposed to find the optimal,
It doesn't find the optimal. That's also a misconception. Evolution doesn't find the optimal. It finds the good enough. It finds the best that it can deal with under the circumstances, and good enough is usually enough to just keep going on. It's whatever a species discovers along the way, or discovers isn't quite the right word, but a trait pops up and finds that, hey, this trait makes you a little bit more likely to survive, and so that trait gets propagated. It's not that, evolution found the optimal way of doing everything. It found a way good enough so that way there can be another generation.
Yeah, Douglas Main says path of least resistance in the chat there.
Okay. So it looks like, if biologists want to create a better eye than humans have, I'd be willing to see it.
We don't need to.
Octopus.
Okay, well, what I'm talking about, there's probably something octopi obviously have very different body structures. So here's the thing,
Anthony, you are saying that the octopus eye has to be that way because that's what the intelligent designer had to have it that way. And guess what? That is now literally God of the gaps. The very thing that you said you were going to try to get past, but quite literally, you have no evidence, but you're saying it has to be this way because basically your theology requires it to be that way.
Well, what I'm trying to say is there might be, again, I'm not saying I'm definitely correct. I'm just saying
but you have no evidence. None. Zero. And when you have no evidence for something and declare that it must be, guess what? That is an act of faith. That is God of the gaps.
I'm just saying, if I were to study the
And I'm just
structure,
saying,
the
you
overall
did got to
structure,
the gaps, even though you said you were going to get past that. So I'm sorry, you got to the gaps just without even realizing it. And I think at this point, we're kind of at a dead end. This call has been going on a bit long, and we do need to get to other callers that are patiently waiting.
It's super
all right,
interesting.
thank you for taking my call.
All right.
Yeah.
Do call in again, but boy, oh boy, we have
All
some
right,
other biologists
appreciate
who
it.
would have a bit more fun as
Yep.
well. Good night.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Yeah, kind of going in circles. It was super interesting, I thought.
There were things that we are capturing, but yeah, I definitely get frustrated when you say, oh, this thing isn't that feature, and you've never even looked at it. You don't know the evidence. You know nothing about it, but you know it has to be Photoshopped. It's like, oof.
I know. Yeah, at
It's a
that
good thing I'm
point,
drinking water and not something stronger.
I know, right? It's like we're just, making things up now. It's just, it's insane. Fascinating, though. It's fascinating to watch the wheels turn in such an odd way sometimes.
All right. So in terms of wheels that are turning, we do have a good collection of theist and atheist callers. And I try to give at least a little bit of priority to those who've been waiting the longest. So I do want to bring an atheist in because they've been waiting for over half an hour, and we will definitely get to our next caller soon. How about I bring in Brent, him from Washington, and the Michelson-Morley experiment. Okay. Brent, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Oh, okay. I know this is going to sound a little bit nuts because it's not supposed to be possible, but I may have figured out a way to do what that experiment was trying to do. Detect motion through absolute space.
So just to back up for everyone's sake, the Michelson-Morley experiment, do you want to explain it, or do you want me to try to explain it?
Well, basically, it's they set up a large interferometer so they could change its orientation, and they were trying to decide that light would be moving faster in one direction, and it would take longer to go a different direction if we were moving through space. And the result basically came out as a null. It showed no motion at all. But then Einstein comes along, and more importantly, Lorentz. And if you apply Lorentz's length contraction to the Michelson-Morley experiment, you will always get a null result. It'll always tell you that you're standing still. Now,
worth noting that it's not that it tells you you're standing still. The main thing is that on special relativity, everyone measures the speed of light the same no matter what reference frame they're in. So whether you're moving or not, you would always measure the speed of light the same. And it's weirdly enough from basically just two premises. The laws of physics are the same for everyone, and everyone measures the speed of light the same, gives you all the weirdness of special relativity. Just those two premises and a lot of math.
Yeah. Okay, I'm autistic, and this became relativity became a special interest for me quite a few years ago, 20-some years ago.
Okay.
And you had mentioned The Elegant Universe, and I read through that, and I did not like his examples of relativity at all. They were just not satisfactory. So I bought Einstein's book and read through that. It was better, but still, it felt like it was something missing. So I basically just rebuilt it from scratch. And I came up with the same things that Lorentz came up with, except that everything is relative. Absolutely everything is relative. But that kind of became a problem because, the moon is attracted to where the Earth appears to be. And the Earth is attracted to where the moon appears to be. But neither of those vectors goes through the very center of the system. And that was creating an issue. There was I'd written something up and I'd sent it off to. Was able to get a hold of Freeman Dyson, and he shot me down, basically saying you would end up you'd be breaking the law of conservation of energy because you'd be getting free energy out of a system like that. And I kind of let it go for a while, but every once in a while, especially when I get stressed out and I distract myself, I kind of bring this out. I look over my numbers, I look over my thought experiments, and everything always tells me that it was right, but there was something missing. And one day I was just kind of playing around with another thought. What I did is I added gravity to the train. And if you have a train that's speeding along, a beam from the back would take longer to reach the front. So it would dip down more. The one going from the front to the back would dip down less. Thing is, this is exactly the same thing that happens in centripetal acceleration. Is the trailing edge would take, information from the trailing edge would take longer to get to the front. So it would dip down more. And there's a lot of things that are similar between those two.
That's explicitly what Einstein says does not happen. With the train that's moving and light going in either direction, you will measure the speed of light the same no matter which way it's going. That basically you never add or subtract to the speed of light based on the source of it. Whether a source is coming towards or away from you, you measure the speed of light the same.
Yeah. Yes and no. Because if the track is stationary and the train is moving, someone from the outside is going to see that those beams cross in a different location than the center of the train. And people inside the train will also see that those beams would cross somewhere off the center of the train. I mean, you'd have to have an extreme amount of gravity.
No, because everyone's going to measure the speed of light to be the same. And again, so I think to make sure that everyone who's listening is...
Yeah, I'm not familiar.
I should explain the setup so that way it's a little bit clearer, because in a lot of the textbook examples of special relativity, it takes place on locomotives because it's from 1905. That was the fastest thing around.
Yeah.
But basically, you can imagine observers in a few different places. You can imagine an observer just standing on the ground, and you can imagine an observer on a locomotive going along straight tracks. And to make the effects significant, it's a train going like 90% the speed of light. Absurd fast speeds just to make the numbers big enough to actually notice. But the setup might be that we have an observer, say, sitting right in the middle of the train. And we'll have two light sources on both ends of the train equidistant from the center.
Yes.
So if we have two light sources, and let's say like two flashlights, and we have an outside observer looking at where those light beams will go, and we have an observer on the train, what will they agree on, what they won't agree on? It does get pretty hairy. But the key thing from special relativity is, it's literally the second postulate of special relativity, is everyone measures the speed of light the same, no matter which reference frame they are. So the person on the train, the person on the ground, the person around Alpha Centauri looking at the same experiment, everyone measures the speed of light exactly the same, no matter which direction, no matter how fast the train is going. That's the weird thing. So, Owen, if I was running at you at 99% the speed of light with a flashlight, and you were measuring the light from my flashlight, you would still measure it as if I were standing still.
I see 140.
I understand all that.
Right. Okay. I don't understand it. We're just trying to, make it clear for people who are unfamiliar with the conversation.
Mm-hmm. But if you add extreme gravity to that, things get different, and then there becomes a measurable difference between what's going on.
Gravity is warping space and time, though, right? It's not speeding up or slowing down light. Am I correct on that?
Yes and no.
The speed you will still have light with the same speed, but you will have light's path change. And also it can gain or lose energy, so it can change its frequency, but the speed of light will remain the same.
I kind of disagree with that a little bit. Yeah. That goes into a different topic. With the whole idea of the singularity. But that would be for something else. But okay. So a laser from the back of the train, if it's stationary, it's going to bend down slightly from front to back. And one in the front
because of gravity
will bend down slightly going to the back because of the gravity.
Okay.
Now, if that train is speeding along, the beam from the back, even though it's going the same speed, will end up curving more because it has to go a longer distance.
But they went the same distance.
Yes and no. That's just it.
In what way
I
is
guess
it no?
I'm not understanding.
Yeah. God, I don't know how to explain this better. I wish I could just sit down with somebody and do this. Unfortunately, I'm not in a situation I can do that.
Well, I mean, you could write an email, right? If you could break it down, we have an email address, don't we, Aaron?
I don't know it best, but I think our producer might have a more info.
Okay.
But yeah, if you write an email to us, and you know, kind of gather your thoughts, break it down. You said that you spoke to Freeman Dyson, right? That's pretty interesting. I've spoken to some interesting people too. It turns out people just like answer emails. Anyway,
yeah, well,
you know,
it was his son lives in the same town as I do, and we had a mutual friend. So I got introduced to his son, and then his son gave me his dad's email. I also exchanged a couple emails with Tyson, with Neil deGrasse Tyson in 2007, before he became the self-professed rock star of astrophysics.
Yeah.
And
I wouldn't say self-professed. It was, I think, People magazine that said he was the sexiest astrophysicist alive.
Really? I haven't heard that.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was People or another magazine.
Yeah, well, he thought that my ideas were interesting, but unless I could come up with a testable prediction, that they wouldn't be of much use. But I may have come up with one. But it deals with adding like high acceleration. The thing, I don't know if we have the technology to detect the slight change that should occur, and if we can achieve the acceleration necessary to be able to do it.
When you say high acceleration, does it have to be
with
with something massive, or can it be something particle sized?
It would have to be, because basically you would have to accelerate in a direction. Because what I was saying before, if you are traveling lateral in a gravity well, there will be that deviation. I know it's hard for me to explain, and you can't. It's a deviation in the path, not in the speed, or the measured speed. But the same thing happens if you are traveling in one direction and you accelerate perpendicular to that. Then you have that same deviation in the pathways from the direction you're going and the direction you're going back. I don't know if that explains it any better.
I guess it's you're going to also probably have to. I'm trying to imagine where your source of gravity is in this case, because if I'm thinking like in the normal way that this is a train on Earth, then the acceleration is downward, and the path for the horizontal beams of light is going to be the same, either going forward or backward.
Yeah, but they change relative to the train. Because otherwise the people on the ground would see one path. Well, the people on the ground, the stationary people, are going to see the lasers taking one path, and the people on the train would see something else.
Because the people on the train are moving.
Yeah. I know, it seems to be the only way. I've tried many different ways to try to figure out how to detect motion through space. And every time I did it, there was a combination of, length contraction, time dilation, observational delays, blue shift. Everything always made things look as though you're stationary, even though motion would change things.
There's an even more general principle that we might have to step back to, because when Einstein came up with his work, he called it special theory of relativity. And do you know why it was the special theory?
Yeah. It dealt basically with straight line motion. You're not dealing with gravity, you're dealing with basically flat space.
But there's an even more historical reason why he had to call it the special theory. Because before Einstein, there already was a theory of relativity, Galileo's theory of relativity, and his observation that if you were inside the hull of a ship and it were going on perfectly smooth water, you couldn't tell if the ship was at port just sitting there or sailing along, because you can't actually tell the difference based on velocity. You can only feel acceleration. Yeah. And this is actually fundamental to literally the first law of physics, Newton's first law of physics. An object in motion tends to stay in motion, an object at rest tends to stay at rest. That tendency will only be able to make sense if motion is relative, and like I say, it becomes like foundational to all of our physics. So the fact that you can't detect motion because of relativity is because it's the most fundamental part of kinematics and dynamics.
Okay.
You said you spoke to Neil deGrasse Tyson about this?
There was, well, not spoke, but we exchanged some emails about this.
Okay.
I'd send him my ideas.
Yeah.
Though at the time I didn't have this portion of it. This is the piece that was missing. So if you have a huge mass, it's easy to do with it. With a huge mass, you put a tiny mass in orbit, and it's small enough so that the effect that the small mass has on the large isn't going to do anything, or is so close to zero it's insignificant. And that object is in a circular orbit.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that particle or that grain of sand or whatever is not pulled directly toward the center of that mass. It's pulled to where that object appears to be. His motion is going to change. Your motion is going to change where everything looks like it is.
Okay.
But the problem is so you have the majority of the gravity pulling it toward the center, but you have this small bit of gravity that's actually pulling it forward. And this is what Dr. Dyson pointed out, is that would put extra energy in the system for free. So it would basically break the conservation of energy.
See.
Well, when I did this rail experiment, what I realized is that curvature of space is the baseline for motion. So the curvature around the large mass would actually cause that object to spiral inward. And when I figured out that if you figure out the rate at which you would lose potential energy because of the curvature of space is exactly the same amount of kinetic energy that would be gained because of that little tiny relative angle of gravity. They perfectly balance. They cancel each other out. There's no gain or loss of energy.
I see.
Perfect.
If that is so, if you're saying that the amount of energy is conserved in that way, then are you saying that the potential energy in that system will remain constant?
Yes.
That's basically the same thing then as the two objects don't fall into each other, right?
Yeah. But if it was being pulled toward just slightly off center, and the space wasn't curved, the object would spiral outward, which is what Dr. Dyson was saying. You would gain energy into getting flung out of orbit for no reason whatsoever, but the curvature of space keeps it in place, keeps it in balance.
I don't even think you necessarily need the curvature of space to make sense of it, because you can even just, diagram this with Newtonian mechanics, and I think it becomes easier. It's not too often I have to now go into physics teacher, physics tutor mode, but it feels like I'm telling one of my students, okay, the reason there's a problem here is your choice of coordinate system. And if you choose a coordinate system that's based on the barycenter or the center of mass of the system, it's probably a whole lot easier to keep track of everything. Because if you have it off the center of mass, then you're going to have to include fictitious forces like centrifugal forces to have the system work out. So that might be also a complication depending on which reference frame you choose. But I do fear that we might be going a little bit too into I need to pull out my whiteboard call for the night. But I don't know if this gave you anything you were looking for, Brent. But I think it's at least you definitely got some interesting gears churning. And the thing I know about physics is it can just be the tiniest little things that drive you crazy for a long time. And sometimes it's just a choice of coordinate system, and sometimes it's, oh, you forgot a minus sign, which was probably most of the mistakes in my homework back in grad school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get that. I've a friend of mine who I work with. She's got her degree in physics, but it's more quantum physics, and I'm not going there. But I talked with her, and she says, no, it's all. I don't know if can I use that the Arsler potential. I don't know if I can say that.
I mean, if it's not kind of using it derogatorily, like I could say,
no,
like a fire.
It's.
I think it's fine.
Yes, it's called retarded potential.
Right, that's fine.
It's kind of the shortcut that they use. And yet, so she's the thing that I was all wrong. But I also talked with another friend of mine she's got a degree in geophysics, and I was telling her my ideas and such, and she said she was getting goosebumps.
Mm-hmm.
Because it made perfect sense to her. So
okay.
I don't know exactly where I sit here. But.
Well, I'm pretty sure you sit somewhere in the state of Washington based on the caller info.
Yes, I hope so. Hopefully I'm not getting too fried in the comments.
I'm not looking, but I think we do want to move on to our next set of calls, but I hope this was at least somewhat helpful, Brent.
Okay. All right. Well, at least I got it off my chest here.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thanks.
Good night.
Bye.
Got it.
You know, the other day I was thinking maybe I should go on Amazon and buy a whiteboard because I see Forrest uses his all the time for that. And I'm like, am I really going to use it for the next thing? Probably not. And what happens? Oh, I really should have diagrammed that.
Oh yes. Oh my God. I used to have a whiteboard behind me. It's so convenient. You'd be surprised how often you end up using that thing, like even off of YouTube.
Yeah. Downside though is people then see how bad I am at drawing, and I don't think I need that on the internet.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm not that good at drawing. It's all over the internet, so.
All right. So we have a smorgasbord. Wow. Again, I'm only drinking water, but I can't talk. I'm sorry. We have a smorgasbord of theists waiting. So how about we hop to our next theist caller, who is named Theo the theist from Georgia, pronouns he, him, wants to address TAG OSA. I don't know that acronym, and other arguments for the existence of God. So Theo, are you hearing us?
Yeah, are you hearing me?
It's okay. We can hear you.
Okay, good deal. So, what do you want to get into first?
You're the caller. How do you want to start?
Well, I wanted to address TAG, and I don't know if you guys have probably heard TAG before, right?
I'm unfamiliar. A lot of the audience is probably also unfamiliar, so feel free to explain whatever you got for me, if nobody else.
Sure. Well, sure. I mean, there's a lot of people that present this argument. It's basically logic exists, and I'm really oversimplifying here a lot, but logic exists, and so there's universal concepts that exist, right? And so
I think there's something going on in the background, making it a little bit hard to understand.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
Oh no, you're
better
yeah.
now?
Well, Yeah, a little bit better.
That
It's a little bit kind of shallow sound, kind of difficult to understand you a little bit, but yeah, you can go ahead. So what were you saying?
that there are universal concepts that exist, right?
Okay.
And so the fact that these universal concepts exist means that there's some kind of transcendent universal mind that exists to contain these concepts. And so the only universal mind that could meet that criteria is God.
Why do we
Right?
need
That's basically the gist.
Okay, that's tag then you were saying, right? That's
Yeah,
that's the idea behind tag.
that's the
Okay.
gist. I'm sure other people would phrase it a little more, formally than that. But
Okay. Understood. And you had another one, OSA?
yeah, actually, that's one of my own formulations. I call it the observational synchrony argument, and basically, the universe has sort of a habitability window, right? And it also
Habitability
has
window.
an intelligibility window, right? Like a maximum
Intelligibility window?
intelligibility window. And that,
What's that mean?
I'm sorry?
What does
It
that
means
mean,
it's like a
intelligibility?
period where, it means it's a period where observers can reconstruct cosmic history. Like the existence of cosmic
Okay.
background radiation. We can observe stellar evolution. We can observe fundamental
Yep.
physics. So
Understood.
we have this maximum intelligibility window, we have this habitability window, and the synchrony of these two. The fact that these two overlap in such an interesting way, that is to say that human beings had come along 1 billion years from now, right?
Mhm.
Let's say that the solar system had formed, 1 billion years later than it did. We wouldn't be able to observe the cosmic background radiation that we observe.
Right.
That means
Yeah.
that there's a habitability window in the sense that there's no reason that life couldn't have evolved on Earth, later. There's no reason things could have happened 10 billion years later, but it happened to happen in such a way that we can observe this cosmic history in a way that's maximally intelligible. And so because
Okay.
of that gives a strong abductive suggestion. Of course, it's all probabilistic, but a strong abductive suggestion that God exists.
I'm not sure. Okay, you've lost me again. Do you want to elaborate on that? So let me just kind of break it
Sure.
down so I understand. You're saying that we have
Yeah.
there's a habitability window where there's only a certain period of time where we can exist in the universe because of, heat and all the other stuff. And there's a period
Radiation.
of time that
Right.
we can understand, that we're capable of producing technology that can interpret or read data or whatever, right? Now, elaborate on the
And
next part.
and even and even further, just to add to that intelligibility window, it's not just that we can build instruments, but also that we can understand and sort of reconstruct cosmic history the way we can.
Right. Okay.
We can figure out to such a degree, like say the universe is 13.7 plus or minus, I think it's like 100 million years plus or minus. That's a really good, that's like really good, like we can like what,
Yeah.
like a fraction of a percent in accuracy. Anyway,
Mhm.
the point is that because these windows overlap, and that's such a tight overlap, isn't it just the probability of that? Now I understand that if you said the probability of us being here is like so low, like that, why are we here? That's kind of a silly argument, isn't it? Because we're here. So in other probabilities, we wouldn't be here to make that observation, right? But I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that not only are we here, but we're here at a time when there's maximum intelligibility. we're here at a time when we can reconstruct cosmic history.
Okay,
Okay,
so
yeah,
I'm saying that
I get what you're saying.
suggested
so let me see if I.
that
There's something that strikes me though that is a bit odd when you say we are at a point in time with maximum ability to know our past. How can we know that this is where we have maximum knowledge if there is knowledge that we can't access right now? How would we actually know we're at maximum knowledge level if there's knowledge we can't access?
you're not wrong there. That's a good. That's a really good counter to that, and I've thought about that, and I've realized that maybe, and also another one I could bring up is the fact that maximal intelligibility is kind of subjective, isn't it?
Mm.
Right? Kind of a subjective.
It always
also
makes me at
seems
least
a little
think
bit
like,
like
well,
we're-
isn't this-
you know,
Go ahead.
I also look and notice, hey, there's a bunch of things that we can't observe that scientists wish we could know more. Like we can't like see beyond the cosmic microwave background, so we can't like see what the universe looked like more than 400-ish thousand years after the Big Bang. And we definitely can't see what the universe looked like before the Big Bang, assuming there's any sort of before. So that's an entire who knows how much of existence that's completely unobservable to us, potentially an infinite amount.
Yes, and additionally,
That's also
I don't know if
true.
you've heard the puddle analogy by Douglas Adams. If the audience hasn't
Mhm.
heard, let me just read it. This is it's in reference to us being on Earth at this moment in time. I feel like what's being presented is a little bit like the fine-tuning argument to some degree. This is rather as if you imagine a puddle waking up one morning and thinking, "This is an interesting world I find myself in, an interesting hole I find myself in. Fits me rather neatly, doesn't it? In fact, it fits me staggeringly well. Must have
Right.
been made to have me in it." This is such a powerful idea that
Right.
as the sun rises in the sky and the air heats up, and as gradually the puddle gets smaller and smaller, frantically hanging on the notion that everything's going to be all right because this world was meant to have him in it. It was built to have him in it. So the moment he disappears catches him rather by surprise. That's the puddle argument, I guess, by Douglas Adams.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I understand the whole fine tuning thing. That's why I tried to also include the fact that there's sort of an intelligibility factor there too. But I see your point about how that intelligibility factor might have a bit of subjectivity to it, because
Yeah.
there's also more information out there. There's also things that we might not know. So again, it's not perfect. It's not perfect, and frankly, I don't think any claim, anybody that comes on here and is trying to tell you, I have proof, right? Proof, 100% proof that God exists. That person is not being serious in terms
Right.
of their in terms of their veracity. They're not really investigating and and using skepticism, accurately
Intellectual
and
honesty,
in
right?
the right way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And we've had some fun callers. Like the last time I was on, we had a caller come in and said he was a prophet equal to Moses.
Wow.
Yeah. See, I'm a theist, but I'm not like a biblical literalist, and I'm not I'm not a creationist either. As you can tell by my claims about us being here a billion years later and showing up a billion years later.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I also, it was interesting that you had the caller before that was talking about relativity. Is it true that everything is moving essentially at the speed of light? Like through space-time? Like all the space-time vectors, the velocity vectors are all c?
There's, a few different ways you can try to picture it, but in general, general with relativity. Motion is
Zing.
relative, so the difference between moving and not moving is your choice of coordinate system. You can say right now you're not moving,
Right.
or you can say you're moving 1,000 miles per hour around the spinning Earth center, or you can say you're moving tens of thousands of miles per hour around the sun, or hundreds of thousands of miles per hour, whatever the numbers might be for going around the galaxy. But it's all dependent on what are you trying to compare
Right.
yourself to. Motion is always relative to something else.
Always a frame of reference. Always
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
frame of reference. Yeah.
In the sense, though, that we're all moving, is that we're all, like, say, moving forward through time, and so everyone has their own personal clock, and everyone's clock says it's going 1 second per second. And if you try graphically describing what's going on, it's like one of the things that we did, the whole point with the Big Bang is, hey, if we trace everything back, we see that basically all the timelines seem to go back to a singular region. And yeah, so there are ways that you could try to describe it that way. It just depends on how much do you want your head to spin.
Right, exactly. Because it was like, I like picture it like we're moving, we have this vector like of going the speed of light, and sometimes like if we move through space, that vector sort of shifts into moving through space more and less through time. And so the faster you go, like the less you move through time until you go the speed of light, and then you're not moving through time at all. Like photons aren't even going through time, which is wild.
Oh, yeah. Oh, photons are even weirder than that. When a photon leaves the surface of the sun and comes to the Earth, from the photon's point of view, the trip had both zero distance and zero time. The photon doesn't see any distance between the sun and the Earth, and it takes no time to travel, no distance. So the life of a photon doesn't even really experience time.
That's amazing, and that would explain that. When you mention it, it all makes sense, because I remember somebody talking about an experiment of how the photons sort of diffuse, like when they take light from distant stars and like put it through that double slit experiment, and like the photon sort of, for lack of a better term, picks the slot to go through in the double slit experiment. It's like they're like, how did the photon know what slot it was going to encounter all that time? And when you say the photon doesn't experience time, now it all makes sense, because the photon wasn't waiting 15 billion years. It wasn't even traveling through time.
My understanding of that is, and I'm asking you, Aaron, because you're the expert on this, and I am not, but I believe that that idea came from like a cartoon from like a long time ago, but it misrepresented what was really happening, right? Like it wasn't picking something because
there's truth
it was,
and there's falsehood. It's a little bit mixed up. So I think the cartoon you're referring to, it came from the movie What the Bleep Do We Know, which is full of quantum mysticism. But the double slit experiment is real. It is fundamentally weird. But the thing that film was trying to give the impression of is that conscious observation, that conscious beings come in and change reality by looking at it, by noticing it, by thinking about it. Yeah, that's the nonsense part. But
right?
Yeah, but there's all sorts of weird things.
Right?
Yeah, but here's how crazy it is. So the whole point is this: if you take a light source and if you assume light is a wave, and you have light going through these two slits, then when the light gets passed through, it's like two waves with crests and troughs reaching each other. So you're going to see bright spots and you're going to see dark spots. Now, the thing is, though, there was also this work by this guy named Einstein who showed there was some truth to the quantum theory of things. And it's like, but if light is this quantum thing, if it comes in packets, then it can only go through the left slit or the right slit. So how can that be? So literally one of the experiments you can do, and I've actually done this with my undergrad students in the past, have an apparatus that basically releases one photon at a time and let it go through the double slit. And you're thinking like, well, if it's just, single photons, then it can't possibly interfere with any other waves. So it's just going to shoot through just like it's just a particle going straight. But when you let it go through and you let it build up just one photon at a time, one at a time, come back a few hours, few days, depending on how fast you want it to go, you come back and you see the exact same pattern as if it were a whole bunch of photons acting as waves.
Right. Right. It interferes with itself. The photons interfere with themselves, even though there's time between them, like they're not being shot simultaneously.
Right.
So basically, wave function, is that right?
Oh, that
basically
is. Well, there's an interpretation about what happens when you observe, and so this goes into another part where if you're like really frustrated and you're like, no, bad photon, you go through the left slit or the right slit. You can't go through both. So you set up an apparatus to measure which slit the light goes through. You do that, and when you do that, the interference pattern disappears.
I see.
Yeah.
So that's the weird thing. And what's happening there, that's where basically all the interpretation stuff is. So you mentioned wave collapse. That's from Niels Bohr and the quote-unquote Copenhagen interpretations of quantum mechanics.
Right.
That has been probably the most popular in textbooks, but many worlds interpretation is getting ground amongst at least a few notable voices. It's my preferred interpretation, but as of right now, we don't have like an experiment we can do.
What's the many worlds one? I'm sorry, I'm derailing here. I'm just curious about
So on the many worlds interpretation, the light did go through both slits. It goes through all possible things because all possible states exist.
Right.
Okay, interesting.
Right. Yeah. Everything is, it's this multiverse of possibilities.
Yeah.
That is.
Yeah. And when we say multiverse, we don't mean the one from Marvel.
Right. Definitely not. No, this is more of a, it's more subtle than that.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Wow. So, getting, like I said, I'm not sure if you had any questions for me. I am a theist, but not a typical.
Well,
go ahead, Owen.
Sort of.
I was going to say, I think you meant. I feel like you gave us two things here. There was tag and OSA, and I feel like OSA isn't compelling to me personally. Right, tag. OSA isn't compelling because of the puddle analogy from Douglas Adams. I think it pretty, it's very similar to like fine tuning. But tag, that one was about. Correct me if I'm wrong. Tag was about there are concepts, and if concepts exist, then a mind must exist to
contain
them,
to root them, to ground these concepts. Yeah. And so the idea is
that one doesn't resonate with me. I don't understand that at all.
I've seen the tag argument put in a few different ways. The way that you're putting it, I think is a little bit question begging because it seems to suggest that concepts are fundamental rather than something that's possibly derivable from material things. And that, like I said, that kind of begs the question of where you want to go.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I've had this discussion too, because I've gone around with people with tag. I'm not a huge fan of tag either, right? I don't particularly like it. I mean, I see your point about it sort of question begging. There's also an issue of modal collapse. Like if God is necessary, because that's the conclusion of tag. It doesn't just conclude that God exists. It concludes that God is necessary. So that's a different claim altogether. You're saying God is necessary. And so all propositions grounded in God are now necessary. And so now there's no modality. There's no contingency. There's no possibility for propositions to be false. So that's another issue with tag there too. But it's funny because I brought up these arguments and then I kind of like refuted them. Or you sort of pointed out OSA and then and then I'm like, yeah, that ain't no good either. But
Well,
yeah,
it's
tag. I mean,
it's intellectual honesty, seems to me.
Yeah.
that's how I am. I try to be intellectually honest about it. Like
Yeah.
if I'm going to make an argument, I'm not going to like if somebody presents a counter argument that's like, yeah, compelling. I'm going to listen to it and I'm going to try to understand it and turn it over. I mean, you mentioned that tag sort of begs the question, right? It sort of like assumes, that there are these universal concepts. And I've thought about that too, because I've said, well, wait a minute. What if these things in the universe, like, for example, you bring up things following rules, so to speak, right? We sort of observe objects following rules, right? In these mathematical equations and these physical laws that are, we describe. But the whole idea of a rule, that's really more of a human concept, really our description of what it is. And so I'm not entirely convinced that concepts exist outside of human mind. That really is just a structure within our mind that sort of is like emergent from the matter itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that would undermine all versions of tag. And by the way, we keep saying tag. I believe it's an acronym for transcendental argument for God.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right, transcendental argument for God. And I've heard that argument before, and when I first heard it, I was like, I don't know, something don't seem right about it. Like you ever been to the car dealership and they try to sell you something, and you're like, I don't know about this, right? Something just doesn't feel right about it, right? And that was my vibe when I first heard tag. It sounded like they were trying to hustle me, but
I have to say, I think I trust used car salesmen more than most apologists.
Yeah.
You aren't wrong. You aren't wrong. I think, that's what I was going to come to. Is like, I'm a theist, right? But I'm really disappointed, honestly, with the state of apologetics. I'm really disappointed with it because it does a disservice to the whole world view of being a theist, because I understand if somebody believes, if you believe in God yourself, and that's fine. You can tell people about it, and you can be honest about it. Look, I had this experience, and I felt this way, and God made me feel this way, and this is how I feel about this, right?
Why are you a theist then?
I also understand it. Huh?
Why are you a theist in that case? Like, what convinced you to be a theist?
Why am I a theist?
Yeah.
Oh, I had an immense, I had a spiritual experience. Now,
okay.
And here's the thing:
are you Christian?
Could it have been a product? I would say nominally I am.
Okay.
But it's not. It's not like I believe every single. If you look at the Bible and you take it literally, nah. I'm not a bigot. And I'm not going to take bigotry in there.
Christianity as the answer then? Why the Bible rather than the Quran?
I actually don't necessarily prioritize that particularly. It's really more what I'm accustomed to, right? But I have heard things in the Quran that I also agree with, in the sense of social justice, in the sense of of good things, and there's bad things in there too. And of course, I selectively say, no, that's bad. I don't like that. Right? Of course, because I don't see those texts as necessarily being, let's just say, not all that text is divinely inspired.
Right. Yeah.
And it's pretty clear in a lot of cases that it's not. It's very human. you know, and I could never imagine, you know, if we're talking about some being that we would call God, right? A being that we would give that level of, you know, of you know, power, and, you know, if we imagine God as being this good being that's seeking the best of us, I would never consider such a being as doing those things, you know? And so when I see those things, I go, nah, that's inconsistent with that kind of a being, you know? I use the Bible, I read it, and I take those things into consideration simply out of familiarity, because it's the worldview. I even look at the Pirkei Avot, you know, the ethics of the fathers in Judaism. There's things in the Quran that also strike me. I'm most familiar with the Bible, though, of course, because, you know, I'm, you know, raised in a Western world, surrounded by Christianity. So that's what I'm going to be familiar with. And so there's
Well,
things
I
in there
actually got to that point myself. I don't know, maybe 12 years ago or something like that. I got to that point, and you know, I grew up Jehovah's Witness, and I saw as I was growing up, they told me, you know, Catholicism is wrong, and here are the reasons, and they're correct. You know, they were correct about the fact that Catholicism was wrong. The body of Jesus is not like the crackers don't literally turn into Jesus, right? And things like that. And they went through the list for pretty much all of the denominations. You know, Baptists are wrong because of this thing, Methodists for that thing. And there came a point where I realized Jehovah's Witnesses are wrong also. They're wrong about all of it. And that's when I just kind of walked away. I was like, well, this is all nonsense, all of it. And you know what? Until I get some evidence that it's real, like some real, tangible, actual evidence, I'm just gonna, you know, refrain from making assumptions about anything. Maybe it's real, maybe it's not, but I have no reason to think so. That's my position. Is it fair to say that that's your position?
Hey, well, I would say my position is that I can feel something, but I definitely don't think that, you know, I'm definitely deconstructing
Okay.
a lot of these concepts. There was a time when I didn't believe, and then, you know, and then I took on certain beliefs, but then I have now become more of a deconstruct. I've entered more of a deconstruction phase, where I'm really deconstructing these ideas.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like I said, I was there too. I got to that point too. The thing is, like, the spiritual experiences that people have, do you think that it's possible that that people have spiritual experiences, not you specifically, but just generally? Do you think that people have these spiritual experiences and it's in their head, that it's not actually, like, it's being generated and they believe it to the bottom of their heart, that their life on it, but it was actually in their head?
Not only do I consider that to be a possibility, I even consider it to be a possibility in my own. Right?
So why do you believe then?
Because it's just like, that's the sense that I get, right? But here's the thing: I'm willing to put myself in the other mindset and sort of entertain the possibility and say, what if I'm wrong? Right?
Right.
Because that's how I always. I'm never going to be one of those people that, you know, because I think having this kind of blind idea, right? Because there was a time perhaps that I was a lot more, I had this kind of, I was a lot more doctrinal in the sense that I was really just blinded by this. And it's better to be a little more skeptical and have the ability to sort of deconstruct what you believe. Like, and honestly, I never rejected evolution through any of it. And that's actually part of what put me at odds with things, because I remember running into a lot of people who were very hostile towards evolution. And I always considered evolution, even when I was, even when I believed very much, I always considered it to be the case. You know how people say, well, look around you, right? Can't you tell that everything is designed? Right? And I would look around and go, actually, I look around me and I see evolution being the designer.
Well, here's my thinking on it.
That's what I see.
There's a degree of confidence with Muslims that is beyond my level of confidence when I was a Jehovah's Witness. Like, they are way more sure that they're correct about things, and they have less reason to believe it than I did as a Jehovah's Witness. There are Christians out there that are 110% sure that they are correct. I mean, fanatic nutcases out there that are 110% sure they're right. And that's why, unless I have something hard to kind of indicate that I'm correct about something, I reserve judgment and say I'm going to assume that it's not right until I have something real, because I don't want to fall into this trap of being 110% sure like that, unless there's real good reason,
Right. No, I hear you. And, I think with Islam, the concept of God in Islam is different. It's very it's kind of a more there's a lot of like philosophy behind it, right? There's a lot, and it's kind of like the concept of God it's not like the Christian concept of God, where God is a lot more personal in Christianity.
Yeah.
Whereas in Islam, there's a lot more separation between human beings and God. And so I think that gives.
I will put in the caveat that there are many a flavor of Christianity and flavor of Judaism that's also exceedingly mystical and confounding. So every tradition has ways of being philosophical and mind-numbingly weird.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Of course, and Judaism, you have a lot in there, and you're right. There are groups of Christians that I've run into who are just, they hit me with tag once, and it was like, that's why I brought it up. I was like, you guys heard of this? This is kind of a little bit.
Yeah, it sounded kind of empty and ridiculous to me, the way that I understood it.
Circular in a sense. Also, and I think your co-host brought up, just the kind of question begging going on. Like, it didn't seem right, and then, just and there's problems with God, isn't there? Just logical problems. With the concept of like omniscience, right? If God knows everything, right? If God knows everything, then how can God change his mind? Right? Because no additional knowledge can be added to God, right? So how could God ever make a decision than the decision he will inevitably get to based on the entirety of knowledge?
Right, it's absurd. The omniscience,
kind of logical issues that occur, and all these things. So believe me when I say I am not like 100% on it. Like some of these folks say, "Hey, I believe 100% God exists." Because I'm like, are you sure? Have you really thought about the existence of, let's say, perhaps a God could exist, but that God would have to be, it wouldn't be the kind of God that these guys conceive of.
Well, brother, that sounds a little bit like atheism to me.
What's that?
I said, brother, that sounds a little like atheism to me.
Well, I mean, maybe so. Maybe, but it's like, maybe it is from your perspective. Maybe it could be considered atheism. Like say, for example, and I'm going to throw this out there. I'm just asking this because you said that it sounds like atheism. So I just want to understand if maybe I don't understand what atheism means, which is, if, say, for example, someday we determine that there is maybe not a God like in the omniscient, omnipotent, so forth, so on state in kind of concept, but rather we understand that maybe the universe was created by some intelligent being. Let's say we discover that. Not necessarily omniscient, omnipotent, or meeting any of these qualities, but a being that created him. Right? We figure this out.
Yep.
The fact that that being exists, and now you have no choice but to believe that being exists, would you still consider that? Would you still consider that atheist? Right?
If I discovered hard evidence that was absolutely irrefutable that there was, a creator like the Bible or something, then I would absolutely believe it. Yeah,
no, not the Bible.
Question.
Oh no, not the Bible.
Or whatever.
Not the Bible. I don't mean the Bible. I mean, like, because the whole concept of omniscient and all this and omnipotent and all that those are kind of like self-contradictory concepts, right? They kind of refute themselves. But I mean, rather not so much the Bible, but just a being that created the universe. Doesn't have to be the Bible. I mean, New Testament. No God would ever. But I'm saying, but would you consider yourself like you believe that being existed because you saw evidence? Would you no longer be an atheist at that point?
I would no longer be an atheist.
Well, that's interesting because it's like that being really wouldn't be a God in the sense of the concept of God that we see, right? That we talk about. So when we talk about God, usually we're talking about these kind of theistic concepts of God, where where it's omnipotent, omniscient,
it is worth noting, though, Theo, that when it comes to what a God is, that seems to actually be somewhat culturally relative. Like the idea that there's this one all God that's being of all things is, a somewhat relatively recent philosophical concept. But, there were gods of beer.
Yeah.
They weren't all powerful, and they, after a few drinks, definitely weren't all knowing. So God concepts are a bit complex.
Yeah.
And if we did find out our universe was like simulated, it may not be supernatural, but would I call that a God? I guess we'd have to see what it looks like then. But what I think I can say is we do need to get some of our next callers in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You got it.
Yeah, appreciate the phone call.
Anytime. Thanks.
Good night. That actually went better than I expected because my first encounter with the tag argument was visceral.
Really?
Very
I had never heard
specifically, it was the first time I encountered it. It was actually not me personally. It was me watching Matt Dillahunty on the Atheist Experience, so like 15-ish whatever years ago. Right. Person calling in and really aggressively saying he could absolutely prove that God existed, and it was one of the early viral moments for Matt.
Yeah.
All right. So we got 4 more calls, so I'm going to hop to our next theist caller. Name is Koro. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. She, her. Koro from Canada, specifically Shinto theism. So how science answers how, religion answers why. So, Koro, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me all good?
Just fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
What do you got?
I'm guessing mine will probably be a bit shorter because my belief isn't actually as strong.
Okay.
Because so I consider myself a bit of like an agnostic theist, right? Like I don't think theism is directly provable from, but I think it can be beneficial to believe it if you
Nope, we
go
lost you
about
for a second. You
investigating
don't
it,
think
right?
you broke up there. You said you don't think theism is provable from what?
From logic. Like
Got
I
it.
see a
Okay.
bunch of theist arguments about like epistemological arguments and whatnot, but I don't
Mhm.
think they really hold up to scrutiny. But I do think that it can be good to think about it anyway. Like
Mm.
in the sect of Shintoism that I believe in, it's not really provable in any one way or another. It's just the idea that every object has a certain spiritual essence, and that kind of manipulates what happens to the object, and it is the reason that the
I'm sorry,
scientific
we
laws
lost you
happen the
again.
way
It
they do.
manipulates what happens when what?
It's essentially the reason why the scientific laws happen for that object.
Okay.
It's the spirit influencing the object in its own way,
I see.
which is not really provable or disprovable, I think. But in my, sorry, this is my first time. In my mind,
Okay.
it's kind of like it helps. I think in this way, it helps me be a bit more grateful that things turn out the way that it does.
Mm.
And I think as long as the religion promotes good habits like that, I think it's a good idea to believe in. If that specific religion doesn't do that for you, then it's not the religion you should think of, and you should think of a different religion that gives you that sort of beneficial boost. You know?
Okay. Yeah, I can understand where you're coming from. Although it sounds to me like if I were in that situation, I wouldn't need religion kind of provides a moral framework, right? But it sounds like in this case, I would already have a moral framework and I would be superimposing a religion onto that moral framework that already exists. So why kind of take along all of the extra baggage that's unnecessary when I already have the moral framework to work with?
Well, I mean, if you have the framework and it works fine for you, then there really isn't a reason. It's more if it helps promote, because in my sense, the way that I process it in my mind is that the things that we uncover in physics and whatnot are kind of
Mm-hmm.
mapping the behaviors of those spirits, and I think it kind of provides a different context to the physics, even if it's not something you can really show. Right?
Mapping the
Like
what? Say it one more time. Mapping the what?
the behaviors and the habits of the different spirits,
Okay, I'm
right?
not sure how you. I'm trying to understand like how we arrive at the possibility that like spirits existed in the first place. Can you get me
Quite
there?
frankly, it's one of those things. I've looked at a lot of religions, and
Yeah.
typically, because I was a very long time. I used to be. So I grew up in a Christian theology, and a lot of the things I found there were really deeply dissatisfying. But
Right.
I think the idea that it's just well, I could change my belief later on, but it's the one that when I put my mind to it, I seem to have a bit more positive mental reaction from it. So it's definitely a comfort thing,
Mm.
but it's one of those things where there's not really a downside to it, me believing it, because I still
Mm.
fully accept that it's science behind it, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I do
you
have
go
a worry though, because when you say that basically there's some sort of spiritual force having things go in certain directions, to me that has there's two sides to that coin. One that means when good things happen to you, that it's almost like something is out there looking out for you. But when then bad things happen to you, do you end up blaming yourself? And when there are massive tragedies, whose fault is that? So I'm thinking, like, for example, was it 2004 tsunami in Southeast Asia that like wiped away almost 250,000 people? Was there a spiritual force looking out for them, or did all those people somehow deserve that? Those are the questions that emerge if you basically say there's a spiritual order guiding things that way.
I think on a grand scale, I don't think they can influence it to such a high level of power. I think that like grand disasters and whatnot are just how it turns out to be based on like whatever caused it at the time, a massive earthquake or whatever happened it to be. But
Yeah,
I
well,
think it's
I mean,
more
even
just
on a small
small things.
scale, like even on a small thing, though, it only takes like one mutation, and then all of a sudden you have a cancer cell. So again, it becomes like, hey, why are these spiritual forces nudging my cells to try to eat me alive? These are the terrible things that happen if you do imply spiritual forces guiding even small things for and against people. And there's a lot of children that definitely did not deserve cancer.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good. I hadn't really thought about that at the time. I'm still kind of a bit. I'm still kind of thinking about it. I'm still kind of trying to decide for myself what's the best form of belief. So I'm not really too concrete in my belief right here. I think I might have to
Well,
put a bit more thought in it to see if it really has a good, solid justification for things like that, because I can't really think of one right now.
that's
Well, for
that's
the
only
most
we can
part,
ask of each other.
yeah, I believe
Pardon?
that
Go ahead.
believing true things is preferable to believing false things, um, inherently. Just at its
Yeah.
face, I believe that that's the case. And for that reason, even if something is innocuous, I still want to be sure of its truth value. So I don't know. That's kind of how I view it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, because I'm a math major in university, so I tend to, if something isn't directly derivable from logic, I tend to have a really kind of iffy reaction to it, because it's definitely a lot less concrete than, say, the triangle inequality or whatever or whatever you can think of from math, where you can have concrete rules, concrete consequences. So it's definitely a bit of cognitive dissonance in my brain. But
Right.
in my mind, even if you're believing something wrong, if it doesn't dissuade you from believing the right things and it helps promote good habits, like if a Christian donates to the poor because because they believe it's the right thing to do according to their religion, and they still believe in science, and they still maybe they're even a scientist themselves, then I don't really think it's really a bad thing, even if it's not exactly the truth that they're seeking, right?
I can see where you're coming from. However, as they say, religion can make good people do bad things. So my question is, do they have a moral framework that would include that stuff anyway? I would argue 99% of the people that go to church have a personality type where they would want to help other people. However, net, I would argue religion has done far more damage than good by a mile and a half.
Oh yeah, I
And
100% agree.
I also believe that, believing true things is preferable to false things at its face. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I definitely 100% agree that religion has definitely caused a lot more bad than good, which is why I don't really promote. Well, it's definitely an iffy thing. I promote that you should follow, well, because the people who do good via religion, religion is further motivating them to do good. So it's not that they should follow the religion to a T, like a lot of the slave owners did, like a lot of all those people did. They should
Right.
kind of rely on their own gut and then see if they can be motivated further to
Yeah.
follow what's good to them via their religion, right?
Yeah. The problem is, though, some people's guts will take religion and find it to amplify their bigotry. And, well, we got thousands of years of history of people showing that those are powerful influences. And I would say we can at least minimize the damage that does if you have to say whatever you claim, you have to show why we should believe it to be true rather than hope that people will turn it in a good direction, because that which can be manipulated by an individual can also be manipulated by a demagogue.
By the leader, sure.
It's definitely fair. There's definitely an aspect of people tend to take a lot of religious texts and they tend to let them influence themselves more than they should, which is definitely a massive problem, I think.
Yeah.
Like if I
It's a
see
complex
text
relationship
that says go
that,
do something.
Yeah. I can't remember the paper, but it was a bit of research on individuals and their their personal political beliefs and their beliefs about their God, and that there's pretty strong alignment between the two, as you might imagine. But the interesting thing as well is if a person went from, say, more conservative to liberal thinking or vice versa, their belief about God would also shift. So if you are racist, your God also has racist views. If you're an egalitarian, your God has egalitarian views. It seems like God didn't make us in our image, we made God in our image. And if our image changes, so does the multi-faced deity that we have concocted.
Yeah, I guess that's. I don't think I've actually heard of that one before. That's definitely a really good point. Sorry, I keep saying the same thing. I'm still kind of new to a lot of stuff.
No, it hasn't sounded like that. Sometimes I say the word right all the time. I say it constantly, and I'm like, "Am I saying this too much?" So yeah, you're good.
Yeah, like I realized I kind of forgot to mention the thing that I actually put in the topic, which is so in my mind, like you can have scientific observations and scientific laws and models, and they can explain how, they can describe stuff, but I don't think they can really explain why, right? Like you can have like the philosophy of science and they can kind of ponder as to why, but I don't know if any one explanation is necessarily more valid than another. And so I feel like that's one of those things where that would be the unfalsifiable gap where religion would take place without harming anything, right?
Yeah.
Like if you have if some random person comes across Michael Jackson's music in the world in the year 4000, and they go, "This is really interesting. Maybe I can figure something out by studying this album." And then they're like, okay, the album appears to have like a certain rate at which it plays. We'll call it the law of tempo, and then it appears to have certain beats. We'll call this the law of 4/4 time signature. But you can't really explain how the music came to be written or how it, or any of that kind of stuff. It's a category error in that sense, right? There's stuff that you can't really explain by that methodology, right? And I feel like
I think though there's a bit of difference between the regularities that we might find in music from your example and causal laws that allow us to actually make falsifiable predictions and build technologies based on those predictions. So, for example, I'm holding my cell phone right now, and if I let go, I think we all know what's going to happen. And if you ask me why, I think I can confidently say, well, because of the mutual gravitational force between objects with mass, namely, in this case, the Earth and my cell phone. By saying why, am I being a bad philosopher of science?
I don't think so. I think it is one of those things. I was thinking about it before the call, because how and why can, to some extent, be interexchanged when you're explaining something, because it's kind of, in a sense, they kind of explain very similar concepts. Like, I can say that if I drop my phone and it falls towards me, it's because it happens. Like, what? Why? Well, it's because the curvature of space-time curves it so that it naturally moves towards my lap or whatever. But you can also say that as a response to how. It's kind of, you can kind of answer it to both, but I think they're asking like slightly different questions, right?
In that case, the question of why sounds more like a question of purpose, like to what end are things happening? Why are they happening this way rather than another way? But then I think that falls back into arguments about God existing and creating for a purpose. And, well, if we think the universe doesn't have such a purpose, then there are no whys to answer, at least on that grand scale.
Well, yeah, it's not really a necessary belief. It's just what it's. I'm not really hiding that it's more just like a comfort thing, right? It gives you just a basis to place things in. You can have there be no reason there. You can have there be a reason there. As long as it's one of those things. As long as it's well founded and it doesn't stop you from acting compassionate and intellectually honest, I feel like it's not really that bad. I keep repeating the same point, but I'm
no, that
really
makes
not
sense.
that
I
weak.
get where you're coming from. Like, what's the downside to it? Like I said, I just don't. I feel like I just want to believe as many true things as possible, as few false things as possible. That's all. So, for the sake of just for that principle alone, that's why I don't accept any of that. But yeah, that's my position.
There's definitely an aspect to it where I have no idea whether it is true or false, right? Like, it could be true, it could be false. As to whether or not it's, like, I think that how bad it is, or how bad it is to believe something that's false, depends on the specific repercussions and the rabbit hole involved in it, right? Like, I can believe, I'm not very good at analogies on the spot.
That's all right, but I think the main point, though, is we want to not believe false things. We definitely don't want to go and say, I believe a false thing, and find a reason to justify staying wrong, because wrong things will not help you get to right conclusions. If anything, it will prevent you from getting to right conclusions. And in a totally formal logical system, one false premise, and you can prove anything. You can prove just from 2 + 2 = 5 that I am the Pope. And we don't necessarily want to allow...
Right?
Yeah. So if we want to avoid that, then we need to be careful and sophisticated on what things we believe precisely as possible and minimize the number of false things we have. And when we find out something is false, or even just not probably true, that we don't endorse it, don't believe it, maybe even reject it if we have evidence enough to say. And if you do that, I think you end up also being overall happier, that you can say, hey, I've actually done the work to have confidence in what I do and don't believe, and you can actually guide your life a lot better if you know what's actually going on rather than what you prefer was going on.
Honestly, I don't really have a good counter to that, honestly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
I'm not really
if I,
that strong in believing this, so I'm fully capable of switching my belief. Because it's not actually strong enough that it's really set in fully, right?
Yeah. I actually want to bring up something our producer mentioned, that when you believe some not true things, it predisposes you to believe other not true things. And the worst example I can think of that is people who get caught in scams and cults tend to be susceptible, even if they do get out of a scam or cult, falling into another one.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's
I guess it is a bit of a rabbit hole, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah, the worst part of the rabbit hole is if you have a propensity to dig into rabbit holes, you tend up just getting into more of them rather than getting out of them.
Yeah, I guess that's fair enough. My belief actually isn't that old in this. It's only like a couple of weeks, but I've had a lot of time to think after midterms and everything.
That's what college does
I
to
do
you.
definitely think. Yeah, it's definitely rough. There is definitely. Honestly, I think my belief is probably definitely. I can't even really bring up any more arguments because now I think I'm leaning more towards atheism again.
God, I think we made an atheist right live on air, huh?
Yeah. I have to say, Cora, the way that you're talking is somewhat reminiscent to things I was thinking and saying when I was in college about 20-ish years ago. So the stuff you're thinking about, folks like myself have been on that journey as well. And of course, the more people on the path, the merrier.
Yep, absolutely. I came to the same conclusions. I followed the same thought pattern and everything. So it sounds like we're kind of on the same track.
There's definitely a bit where it's because I'm not like majoring in like theology or anything, so I definitely don't have the masterful insight as to all the beliefs in the world. I do definitely think, from what I've read, that none of them are falsifiable, at least from the ones that I've seen, the things that I've noted. But there is definitely, it is definitely encouraging me to lean more towards my mathematical mindset of if it can't be proven directly, then you can kind of just get rid of it. Science is kind of a special case because science is like 99.99999% sure, which is good enough for me, honestly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We may not be able to prove that the sun will rise tomorrow, but we're just like, dude, let's get on with our lives. We got more science to do.
As sure as you can be about anything, pretty much. Yeah.
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 All right.
I'm not sure I really have much else to bring up.
All right. Well, Cora, we did enjoy the conversation. I'm glad that we had this, really thoughtful chat. This was extremely pleasant. You are a model Canadian.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.
And I apologize on behalf of Americans. I apologize to our hat, Canada, for what's going on politically right now.
Well, they still got about another 2 hours and 45 minutes to sell us stuff.
You're right. Oh, are the tariffs starting soon?
Midnight.
Oh, I didn't realize that was tonight. Oh my God, dude. I'm sorry, Hat. I didn't mean for this to happen. I had no part in it. I did my best.
I think they prefer being called Junior.
Okay, is that so? Okay, well, I prefer America's Hat, so
no.
there's
Yeah, I will try to come up with figure out what the best terms Canadians have for being America yet not America.
Yeah.
All right. So we got a few more callers. The next one has been waiting for a while. let's bring in super conformal, pronouns he, him, from New York, is an atheist, and apparently super conformal has a bit of a hard story. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Right. So the thing is that I have two questions for you. One question is that this is something that I didn't tell the screener, but this is a bit related to the question that I told him. So my father passed away last year, and after that, I have been struggling with the question that how to grieve as an atheist, because the religious people, they have stories to tell themselves that if your loved one is in a better place now and blah blah blah. But as an atheist, you know that the person who has died, and it's very hard as compared to religious people to grieve. So I'm sure that you have gone through much more than I have. So do you have any words to say on that? Because I find it really hard.
What do you think? Do you have anything, Aaron? I had my experiences with this.
I'll try to give a few thoughts, but I know I have had family members die, but I've also avoided so many tragedies. So I feel very, to misuse a term, blessed in avoiding some of those worst of things. But to me, it's a bit like this. We all die, and I think in many ways when you pass things off to an afterlife and say the person's in a better place and things like that, it's a sort of a denial that doesn't allow you to fully process what has happened. And once death starts approaching you, you haven't really built up the realization about what's happened and actually make it even more terrifying. It's not something I think about often because I don't think mortality is nearby, but I also have to remind myself, hey, I just drove my car today and I had almost a small accident. I can only imagine, hey, one T-bone and I don't come home. So
Sure.
I know I'm mortal, even if I'm not thinking about it constantly. And the best I can think of is say, when I die, I won't exist. But I hope I have also done things that I can leave behind things so the people I care about can still carry on, whether that's financially or emotionally. And conversely, when it comes to people that I love and care about die, the thing I realized some time ago is that funerals are not for the dead. Those are for the living.
Yes.
Those are the times where we confront death. We look at it, and if in certain traditions, you might literally look at death in the face if it's like an open casket sort of ceremony. And honestly, it's experiencing, watching, talking about death with people that you care about that makes it just a little bit more tolerable. You're never going to be happy about death. At least I don't think so. But you can be at least a little bit more accepting and realizing you still have the things around you that you care about and a network of people that care about you. And that's the best thing that can ever happen in a funeral, is that the living can think about death and the dead and live because of it.
Yes, and
Sure.
yeah, and Aaron, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but let me just present a thought experiment. First of all, when I die, the universe ends. That's just how it works. So I try to make other people's universes as good as I can while I'm here. But imagine it. This is how I imagine it. I imagine it like an apple going through an MRI machine and getting, basically pictures of slices taken, and this sentient apple can see the slices coming, and then it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller until it starts to disappear, and the apple starts freaking out like, oh my God, it's going to be gone. But why is the apple upset about it? Why is it freaking out about this? It's just like the end of the picture. Space and time are in effect one thing. So it's almost like our lives are one complete picture, and we don't need to be sad about, part of the picture existing over here when we can just appreciate that it exists in the first place. I moved away from New York City like 3 weeks ago or something, and I'm sad about that, but I can appreciate that it's there, that it's part of me, my experiences, and everything else. That's how I view it.
Right. Sure. Okay. So I have another question. So my mother, she's alive, but she's not in a very good condition. And recently, so the thing is that I have been atheist for quite a while now, many years, but I never discussed that with my parents, right? My father, passed away without knowing that I'm an atheist. But I have never told my mother that I'm an atheist, but she kind of knows, right? And she sometimes had told me to come. So, I used to be a Muslim, right? And she has said many times to me to come back to Islam, but I always say to her, I never say that I'm an atheist because I do know that she will not be able to take the shock probably. But I always tell her that, religion is a personal matter, so I don't want to talk about it. But now she is in a bad condition, and she's telling me that it may be her last years or last year probably. And she has told me that nothing makes her sicker than the realization that I'm not a Muslim. And now I have this guilt that am I killing my mother? And I don't know how to process this particular, scenario. I do love her. So I think that, one of the possibilities that I thought of is that should I just lie to her? But I don't think that I will be able to, cover up that lie because she will know that I'm not, Muslim. So do you have any, advice on that?
Personally, when I was leaving Jehovah's Witnesses, I knew that there was no, I have no obligation to Jehovah's Witnesses to tell them, oh, I'm not a Jehovah's Witness anymore. They're going to try to ruin my life when I leave, right? So I'm perfectly free to lie to them morally, in my opinion, and I sleep fine at night. But there comes a time where I can't lie to them for myself. I have to tell them who I am and what's going on and how I feel about things. Because I don't want to live a lie. I don't want to live as somebody that I'm not, I would say if you can manage it, you have no obligation to tell your mom the truth. But, if you can't live with lying like that, then you can't live with lying like that. That's just what it is. But no, you're not killing your mother, in my opinion.
Right.
You are being who you are. It's like somebody who's gay and comes out of the closet to their parents. They're not killing their parents because they're gay. That's just what it is. You can't change it. You can't, nothing. It's not on you what happens.
Right.
That's my take.
True. One of the realizations that kind of bothers me is that, that she's not only my mother. I have two siblings, and they don't have any, they don't deserve that, their mother died because of something that they didn't do. So even if I don't know, I do know that I'm not contributing, to her death, but if she takes a lot of grief because of, me, then is it fair with my siblings? It's like a moral dilemma. I don't know if it is, but it is kind of like that. So that's what makes me really sad now. So that's why I decided to call.
Yeah, I think that you have an obligation to yourself to be honest about who you are to yourself. And if it bothers you to not be truthful about it or whatever, then be truthful about it. It's you've got to live your life as who you are. And that's just what it is. Like I said, like a gay person has no obligation to hide anything from anybody to help anybody else. You should, as everybody should, be exactly who you are and let the chips fall where they fall, in my opinion.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, okay. So these were the two questions that I wanted to ask you. And before I go, I have to say, so I'm a PhD student of theoretical physics, and it was kind of hard to sit through that call that talked about Einstein's special relativity. It was fun to sit through that call, by the way. Okay. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I do have to say, I'm really sad to hear about what has happened to your father and your mother. I really hope as much possible time you can have with her and make her last days as good as possible.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day.
You
Good
too.
night.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. It's something that we all have to deal with. Like I said, it's probably easier being a Christian, but it's false hope. It's not real. So
Yeah,
my cat just
from
opened
what I
my door.
understand, I think there's even science that actually shows that people like literally on their deathbed show more signs of the stress of dying than those who don't think there's an afterlife. So
Interesting.
unfortunately, there's been about 100 billion humans with 100% perfect death rate. So pretty high probability I'm not going to be immortal.
Right.
I've run the numbers. They're not in my favor. So I got to just do what I can with this life. And if I end up dying in bed tonight, I hope I've also made sure that I've left a good legacy and my wife can still carry on with what nest egg I can give her.
YOLO, right?
Yep. Literally.
Yep. You gotta enjoy the time you got.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we have 2 callers remaining. Both are theists and both with J names. So interesting coincidence with that. Let's go with the one who's been waiting the longest. We have Jimmy from Jamaica, pronouns he, him, a theist. God doesn't need to exist to be real. All right, Jimmy, you got to tell us what's on your mind.
Hi, good evening, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. It's what up with this? First of all, I just want to say thank you guys for having me. I love both your work. I listen to you guys quite often.
Well, thank
so
you
for
for
me,
listening. I appreciate that.
yeah, man, no worries. So for me, I view God as an entity that doesn't need to exist physically for him to have an impact on the natural world.
You said you don't believe that God has to be real to have a natural impact on the world. That's what you were saying, right?
More or less.
Yeah, God does have an impact on the world, but it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make it any more real or valid or whatever. I mean, there are people out there that believe that like 7%, or I'm sorry, 7% of the U.S. believes that like chocolate milk comes from brown cows, and of course that belief has a real effect on the world too. But it doesn't make it any more like valid or real or helpful or whatever, right?
True, that's true. I'm wondering if maybe it might be an example of one of those things that it doesn't really have any basis in reality, but it makes life less painful for some people, or it makes life even interesting for some people. Because I'm not saying that the world needs to believe that God exists in order for him to have any basis in reality either. But I think for myself, I think I perceive God as something that doesn't even need me in order to do what he does. And an extension of that would be whatever is going on in reality, whatever I'm aware of, or whatever, even things I'm not even aware of, those things are also a consequence of him. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I'm just not connecting with the idea that like I'm not seeing the hard relevance behind it. Yeah, people do believe in all kinds of things that are inaccurate, and it affects the decisions that they make, of course. Flat earthers think the earth is flat, and as a result, they'll spend all kinds of money on trying to prove it or whatever. But, it doesn't make it any more real. And as Aaron said earlier, I believe, we have to live in the world that we're in and deal with the cards that we've been dealt, basically. That it is what it is.
right? More or less. I think, well, I agree with you. I agree with you that it doesn't really make a difference whether if I believe it or I don't believe it. It's not going to change. Water is still wet.
Mm-hmm.
But I think maybe where I'm coming from is a headspace where many theists come from a place thinking that not only do I have this belief, but other persons need to see it that way as well. So for me, I've really come onto the show to kind of get an idea as to where my belief system is. What I mean is, quite often when I hear you guys talk to Christians, it seems more combative, I would say. This evening has been quite amicable and cordial, I must say. But I sometimes listen to the arguments that you have with persons regarding God and his existence or non-existence. And sometimes I wonder if I might have faulty thinking or if I need to reevaluate my position, because am I the person who is going to be having a shouting match with somebody because they're not believing in, they don't believe in the same thing that they believe in? They're invalidated because they don't share the same belief.
I understand where you're coming from with that, and there are some people who are more combative. God, I can't get this word. More combative about this subject. But in my experience, I've had like a really bad experience with religion, and a lot of others on this have also, and it's like infuriated me deeply to my absolute core how I've been treated, and not only that, but how others are actively currently being treated right now. And listening to people come on here and just flat out lie, just make shit up brazenly, it's almost like it's channeling all of that fury into that one person who you're listening to just flat out lie to your face, So that's probably why people are more combative. I'm not going around knocking on doors. I don't even care if anybody believes the way that I believe, but I want to make sure that everybody is set straight and doesn't misunderstand who I am or what I believe or why I believe it, or hate me because I believe it, or whatever other thing. So that's why I'm on here talking. And I try not to be combative as much as possible, because I don't think that's how you convince people to kind of move away from their positions. But yeah.
Right. Well, more or less, I'm in agreement. Aaron, do you have any alternatives, anything different?
I guess the only thing I can add to this is that when it comes to creating stories that we might find comfort in, but that aren't actually real, it seems like we can do that outside of religion. We have lots of fiction that's worth telling, that's insightful at times. And it doesn't have the baggage of, and you have to also believe this, and there's any sort of formal system of things you have to say correctly, except when you go to sci-fi conventions and you have to name all the components of the Millennium Falcon.
Right.
Okay. Well, more or less, I think I've gotten an answer for my position. More or less, I think I am on the right path. More or less, I'm not going to say that my belief is absolutely right and everybody needs to believe in what I believe in. But I just wanted confirmation that I wasn't one of those persons that needs the rest of the world to see things the way that I do, and I need to ensure that people believe and see the world through my eyes. Otherwise, then they're my enemy.
Yep, absolutely. I don't view the world that way at all. I do get people's fury, but I don't see it that way either.
Okay. All right. Well, more or less that's it for me. I'll try and call back another time.
Sounds good.
Please do.
Okay, thanks. Have a good night.
Good night.
You too. Awesome. Yeah, that was very interesting. There's kind of an angry atheist stereotype, and I guess there's probably a stereotype about it for a reason, because people are like, I'm certainly not happy about how things went when I was younger. So.
Yeah, well, there's plenty of people that religion has actively harmed, and the thing that usually upsets me is not the harm that I've gotten from religion. I've been extremely lucky in my life, but what gets me angry is bad arguments and lies. That gets my blood pressure up.
Absolutely.
But we got one more theist caller. Another caller from Canada named Jasmine, pronouns she, her, talking about repercussions on what's going to happen in the education system in the good old US of A, I think. So, Jasmine, are you hearing us?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, the question is, since Trump demolished the education department, will your system just become crowded with religious schools, and what repercussions would that have on your community in general?
I focus on this subject a lot on my channels. I don't think that I'm not sure. Maybe he has abolished the Department of Education, but I think it technically still exists at this moment. He's just destroying it, like gutting it, basically. Luckily, we have a system where states kind of, have their own departments of education, and by and large, U.S. states control their own education systems, local municipalities and things. And right now, the curricula are all very similar across the states, and it's gonna, they're going to change those curricula or whatever. I think that's the right word. Eventually down the line, but hopefully before we get to that point, we'll get somebody in who will kind of rebuild the Department of Education. I don't know. Assuming we continue on this path that we are on, worst case scenario, we'll probably see a situation where high schools are accredited in the same way that colleges are. I mean, I don't see this happening. I'm just laying out an obscure possibility. And some states and some municipalities will not accept, or some jobs won't accept high schools that are not accredited from these, organizations. Or that seems to be what the free market has created outside of government regulation. Now, what was the other thing you said? It was religious schools. Yeah. Right now, religious schools are nearly completely unregulated, and homeschooling, again, state by state, almost completely unregulated. You can tell students literally anything you want, just about in homeschooling or whatever. My concern, and I'm very concerned about that, but that's existed for a while. My primary concern right now is the fact that they're getting to a position where they could receive state funding. And my problem with that is more about the fact that the state is favoring one religion over another. And it's very clearly, erasing parts of the Constitution, completely ignoring it in some cases. Not so much a concern about the educational standards, because, there are problems there. But yeah, more worried about the encroachment of Christian nationalism.
Yeah. For better or for worse, in the US, education is local. So it's the local school boards, the state boards that kind of decide what gets taught. And the funding is extremely local because it's usually done by property taxes. So the Department of Education going down, which, from what I understand, it's in a political legal limbo, but it's not shut down, because I think that can only officially be done by an act of Congress. But basically, It means guidance for school districts won't be available, and perhaps more importantly, funding. And especially for poor school districts, this is going to hurt them real bad. School districts that are already well off don't need the federal funds in the same way that schools in poorer regions are. So it's just going to basically make it so where education is already hurting, it's going to hurt more. Where education has been doing fine, they're going to shine brighter by comparison. So it's just going to create more haves and have-nots. That's my biggest worry, along with the fact that, various denominations will come and say, oh, we'll educate your kids, or more people go to homeschool, where the standards are so low, you can watch Dragon Ball Z and call that your foreign language class.
Yeah. I was homeschooled. I did basically nothing for 2 years, 3 years straight. Literally nothing. It's not good. But yeah. Did we
So
lose
do
you?
you
Yeah,
think
we're-
if religious schools come in, if
I'm sorry? You were saying if religious
if you
schools
think the
come in and what?
religious schools are going to come in and the homeschool comes in, do you think the standards will change, like, at all? Like, some religious schools are good at academics, but some of them are not. Like, I mean, the ones up here, you don't get much in the way of science unless there's practical applications, like medicine, for example. Otherwise, they just generally don't bother.
I think that I'm with Aaron in that it's going to just create a worse like equality divide. The haves and the have-nots are going to become further apart. I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I will know because I've taught both at secular and religious institutions. I've taught at public school and private high school, and fortunately, the private school that I taught at, the kids were all right, the teachers were good, the subject matter was good. Catholic institution, but they didn't shy away from like actual science. So if you go to biology class, you would actually learn physiology and evolution and things like that. You come to my physics class, I'm going to teach you some basic differential equations so you can understand how to do this calculus stuff and explain why swings go back and forth. You were getting a good education from folks like me at those sorts of schools. So good education can and does exist in religious institutions, but private institutions also tend to make their own standards, and sometimes the standard is you're going to come in and you're going to praise Jeebus and say the Earth is 6,000 years old and formed exactly on October 23rd, 4004 BCE.
Right.
Okay, do you guys worry at all, like, say, the religious schools roll in? Do you think your community will be persecuted at all? Because I believe, Owen, didn't you have to move because of some sort of Christianity in your child's school or something?
I did. Yes, absolutely. They were completely psychotic. And the issue wasn't so much that it wasn't so much what they were teaching as the fact that they were completely out of their heads drunk on like right-wing Christian extremism. If that school district and those teachers hadn't been absolutely out of their heads drunk on Christian extremism, then I wouldn't have had to have moved. We could have just challenged it in court of law and moved on with our lives, and that would have been it. So I think in that case, the problem is more the extremist attitudes of the people in the district. And honestly, I think that the extremists are in the minority by like a large margin. The reason that happened to me is, at least in part, because I was in a small town, and and it was a sundown town. Black people not allowed there, not welcome there. Over the past 150 years, so in those types of places, it's going to get worse. But cities will probably be mostly insulated from a lot of the ill effects, the way I see it.
Yeah, I'm in the Boston area, and it's probably not going to change too much here because there's the wealth to maintain good schools around here, and people really care about education a lot. I mean, we have so many universities here. If you go to downtown Boston, throw a stone, you'll probably hit 2 PhDs.
Mm-hmm.
But small town Arkansas, parts of western Massachusetts, it's probably a different story. So it's going to be very regionally spotty. Some places are going to do fine. Some places are going to be extremely uncomfortable if you don't conform.
More suffering is the bottom line. More suffering. It's not going to be like every human being in the United States is suffering. It's just going to be an increase. And we should be trying to decrease suffering, not accept more. Any other questions about it?
Okay, I think that's all the questions I have. No,
Awesome.
I
Well,
think you've answered. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you calling. Also, I appreciate you watching my stuff. That was forever ago. Thank you so much for the support and everything.
Well, thank you to you both. I enjoy both your content, and I catch your shows. Try to catch your shows often.
Absolutely. All right. Well, have a good night. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Very
So,
interesting. Yeah.
all right. So that was our last call on the queue. Now, she had questions about education, but I think there's one thing we should note. There are also solutions. Education is local, which means if you want to make a difference, you can locally. Get and know who is on the school board in your district. Make noise, run for it yourself. That's the best possible way to push out the extremists, is you going in and speaking rationally. If you are quiet, that's when the loud motherfuckers come in and make the mess.
Absolutely. And my wife works for American Atheists. I didn't actually realize this before, but American Atheist has basically volunteers on the ground, and the organization hires a lawyer, my wife, to work with the volunteers, to speak to them, to write testimony to states, and to send in arguments, contact senators, and to get on a phone call at once a week. She gets on a phone call for free with volunteers from different states, and they ask her questions about what they can do and where they should go, and what they should say. She'll even write a script for them and everything if they want to show up to a town hall. This is already built out, all this infrastructure. You don't have to start from zero. Get with American Atheists or something, or some other group, and find the volunteers in your area and work with them. Get on the call with my wife, and figure out what to do next. There are things you can do.
Yeah. In fact, also speaking politically, this Friday there's supposed to be an organized protest across the country. The March for Science is returning to life this Friday. So if you haven't looked into that, I don't know how political I'm allowed to get here, but I like science. Is that too political? And the idea of making some noise to say, hey, we don't want that defunded. We think it's actually a good thing. I would say that's one other thing that we can be doing in the very near term to make our voices heard and try to keep critical thinking and science a part of what this nation does well.
Absolutely.
All right. Ooh, okay, so we got super chats to read. Owen, you take the first one.
All right, can do. We've got $5 from Zurith Moonpaw. Metal name, Dr. Adair. I've described FTL travel as going forward in space but backward in time. Is this even close to accurate?
So, and in this case, FTL is faster than light. And yeah, one of the weird little consequences is if you can go faster than light, you have built a time machine that allows you to go backwards in time. So just one of the reasons I'm a little bit suspicious that FTL will exist, because you then get all the grandfather paradox, time travel paradoxes that happen if you can go faster than light. So I'm reasonably confident that physics won't allow that. And if I'm wrong, future self, come to me now and tell me.
Yeah. Nope. Here we are. It didn't happen. Yes, you're right.
That's actually an experiment that Stephen Hawking did. He had a party, and then the next day he sent out the invitations for time travelers. Nobody showed up.
That's so funny. He was awesome.
Yeah. All right. So we got 50 generous dollars from Don Owen. We may be facing one of the worst recessions since 2008, based on some new estimates showing GDP growth of negative 2.8%. How scared should we be, and is it time to feast on my neighbor's brains yet? Now, I always think it's always a good day for brains, but
right.
Neighbor's brains is a sometimes food. And I don't think this is one of those times. Even if we're going through a recession, we got through 2008, didn't we? And I'd have to look at the numbers. Is our GDP now like 50%, twice as big as it was in 2008? I honestly don't know. But we've clearly come around and done okay. So a bad year should not be zombie apocalypse. A bad year is, I guess I'm not going to retire this year in terms of you have a stock market portfolio. So I'm not scared yet.
Yeah, and additionally, Trump is like a wild card where he's going to do whatever he wants. However, I'm kind of relying on big business to maintain some sort of status quo to some degree. I don't think that an economic crash is not in the best interests of the people at the very top. So I believe that most likely, if we have a crash, though he is a complete fool, there will be people who know what they're doing to try to kind of course correct the economy, in my opinion. So hope for the best. That's why we don't have that's why we don't have tariffs like right now. I know by the time you see this, we might, but that's why they weren't like on day one, because it's going to hurt the economy, and everybody knows it's going to hurt the economy. Anyway, I think this one is me. From Cyrilay for Owen, do JWs acknowledge that Jewish men made women their wives simply by having smex with them? Wondered how many Iron Age traditions they deny. I don't know if they acknowledge. I don't think that they do. They deny a lot of Iron Age traditions, but fascinatingly, Jehovah's Witnesses have gone back and like changed the Bible to have the word Jehovah where it doesn't belong. Like it's based on the Tetragrammaton YHWH, which is Yahweh, but it's morphed over time and everything else, so it ends up with Jehovah. But that name never appears. No, the Tetragrammaton, period, doesn't appear anywhere in the New Testament at all, except for, I think, 3 times in the form of the word hallelujah in the book of Revelation. That's the only time it appears. But Jehovah's Witnesses completely rewrote the New Testament to insert the name Jehovah all over the place. There are like 1,000 instances that they put it in there. It doesn't belong there. So they're totally happy to just rewrite everything if that's what it takes to kind of fit their understanding.
Okay, we got $5 from Monkey at Typewriter. Anthony is the Benjamin Button of education. He was born a genius, and every time he calls, he denigrates just a bit. Dude's going to be a finger paint soon.
Funny, yeah. It was an interesting conversation, but kind of, a dead end.
Yeah, it was a bit frustrating. It's like, oh yeah, I know that argument. Can't articulate the logic of the argument.
Yep, or name any of the studies or the people in them, yeah. We got Monkey from Monkey at Typewriter again. Anthony, you're either lying to us or lying to yourself, or both. Probably both. Lying is bad. It makes baby Jesus cry. Stop making baby Jesus cry. That's funny. Yeah.
Agreed.
I think it was both.
Yeah. We got $5 from Squidward Q Sagan. Anthony lied, then lied about lying. His premise is that evolutionists lie. Yes, irony has never been discovered by creationists.
Right. We got $5 from the Raven 200. Nothing is factual to Anthony. Everything is a lie to him unless it validates his position. Aaron and Owen's words are going in one ear and out the other. Absolutely. That's how it works sometimes with these people.
100%. We got $5 again from Monkey at Typewriter. A lightning-filled night enveloped the building. 4 figures crackle in lab coats, surrounded by vials and smoke. How Anthony thinks science works.
Right.
No, slight difference. That's what we scientists constantly say in the lab.
There you go. And there are only 4 scientists, so that's why he keeps saying scientists say, because there are only 4 of them, so, in the whole world. Let's see, $5 or £5, I think, maybe, from Mystic Minds Analysis Tavern. Machines don't reproduce, living animals do. If machines reproduced, express steam locomotives would die out from small engine selection pressure. Yeah, it drives me nuts when people take the programming, the software analogy too far. It's not like software exactly. DNA isn't, that is.
Yeah. Agreed. All right, we got $5 from the Raven 200. Anthony, Owen is wearing glasses. Go and tell him his eyes aren't a design flaw.
Right.
I'll add to that. I'm not wearing glasses anymore, but I had significant nearsightedness and stigmatism until I had laser eye surgery. So yeah, my eyes are
my
great
God.
once several $1,000s of technology were forced into them with a laser beam.
Oh, it's so disturbing. I saw a video of that once, and it's just so bad. I don't know how you could go through it.
Oh, let me just give a little bit of detail because they told me so much of what was going to happen. They had me really well prepared. They were telling me the instructions of what was going to happen, what it was going to feel like, what I wasn't going to feel. Everything was really clear except one thing. When I was sitting under the machine and they told me, it's like, hey, we have your eyes open. Everything's numbed. You're not going to feel anything. And when the laser fires, everything's going to start looking darker because that's when the laser's firing and like basically burning the top layer of my skin.
Yeah.
All right, everything was there, everything was fine. But the one thing they didn't tell me was, it smells like bacon.
Really?
It took me a second to realize I was the bacon.
Oh my God, I didn't even think about it. That makes sense. That's disturbing.
Believe me, I didn't think about that until I'm literally sitting there and I'm like, wow, it smells like cooked bacon. And I realized, oh, that's my eyes.
That is so disturbing. Oh, okay. This one, me? We've got $5 from Robin Webster. Anthony repeatedly showed that he does not actually know how evolution works, then claims he knows all about it, like Trump does. Yeah. Kind of following in his, following his footsteps a little there.
He has the best evolution. He evolves better than anybody else. This tetrapod came up to him with tears coming down his eyes saying, sir, blah, 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 blah.
It's so
this is an early tetrapod, man. Can't talk yet. All right. I will work on my Trump a little bit more. Jimmy might give me some pointers.
Oh, I liked it. It was good. Got to get a win.
Yeah. There's some work to do. On the other hand, is that work I want to do? No. Okay. Right. How about instead, I read the $5 super chat from the Raven 200. Like a stream. Otherwise, Aaron may hit you with a fire style, majestic destroyer flame, like Madara Uchiha. I think that might be the right pronunciation. Uchiha. And Owen may deal with 1,000 years of death. So
I might.
This is more anime than I can keep up with. I need some help. Kamehameha?
Yeah. Oh, dude, I love Dragon Ball Z. It's your second Dragon Ball Z reference tonight. A big fan of that TV show. All right, let's see. We got $4.99 from Homespun Covers. The intelligence of the hosts on the line is astounding, but I don't know how you all put up with the callers like tonight. Great patience as well, I guess. Well, I appreciate that, but I personally am not a PhD, so I think we're gonna have to amend that statement a little bit. I'm just an interested. I'm just a hobbyist. I'm just an enthusiast, not an expert.
I have to say, in terms of patience, we only had one caller that was a bit, testing my patience. Everyone else was immensely enjoyable to chat with.
That Anthony?
Yep. All right. So we got $5 more from the Raven 200. I'm going to go Super Saiyan now. 5 episodes later. Well, this isn't all it's hyped up to be. At least I could beat Frieza.
Yeah, pretty much. That's why I watch Dragon Ball Kai, because it's so much shortened. Have you seen it? I assume you have.
Here's the thing. I have maybe watched 10 minutes of Dragon Ball in my entire life.
Oh my God, I loved that show. I watched all 9 seasons, like a bunch. I think it was 9 seasons. Oh yeah, it was so good. When I was like 12.
Like I say, I have not indulged in it in the way so many others have. I know I'm missing out, but I also realize if I try to, there's 30, 40 years of material to get through. And I just don't have that wherewithal, at least at this time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, like I said, they made Dragon Ball Kai and it cleared it up. It was it's a lot shorter and straightforward now. So you could probably burn through it if you wanted. We got $5 from Zurith Moonpaw again. Do you have a favorite FTL travel system, fantasy magic system, book recommendation?
Ooh, There are things I actually like about the most iconic or grounding time travel story, H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. Because he's talking about like the fourth dimension and things like that before Einstein even existed. So he was amazingly like forward thinking in creating that sort of fiction. And I'll also particularly note the movie version from 1960. I mean, obviously, it's very much a piece of its time, so it's not exactly with it in many ways, but there are still things about it that just are still like it captures the imagination, especially the ending, because just to spoil things. So the main scientist person who invents the time machine goes super far to the future, discovers that humanity splits into two groups: those living on the Earth on the ground called the Eloi, and those living underground called the Morlocks. And the Morlocks turn the Eloi into cattle.
No.
So it's a bad future. But the time traveler gets back to his time machine, goes back to his own time, and in the movie version, he then tells his friends and such. They don't really believe his story, but then he nonetheless goes and he takes 3 books off the shelf and goes back to the future to help the Eloi rebuild their civilization. And we don't know which 3 books they are. And so the last question from the movie was, if you were to rebuild civilization, what 3 books would you take with you? That's
Interesting.
one I don't have a good answer for, but it makes me think.
That is very interesting. Yeah.
And just as a slight joke bit of trivia as well, the person who gives that last line is a Scottish actor who was also the original voice for Scrooge McDuck.
Oh, that's cool. Personally, I feel you've answered the science questions pretty well, but book recommendations, I can always lay one down, although they're not scientific books necessarily. Big fan of history. I liked For the Soul of the People by Victoria J. Barnett for kind of Holocaust history, church history during the Third Reich. I also wrote a book about it. Was Hitler an atheist? But just for entertainment, Death Stalker by Simon R. Green is the best. It is the best book I have ever read in my entire life. And everybody else should read it too. Is the next one
and
me
one
or
last
you?
anecdote I should it's probably me, but one last thing I should also have noted. When it came to FTL system, I have to give a personal anecdote. One of the reasons I became a scientist is because of the movie Back to the Future. So the DeLorean will always be a time machine to me. All right, so we got $10 again coming in from Don Owen. The U.S. may pull out of NATO if rumors are true. What do we do? I honestly am worried a lot about this because the entire world order since 1945 has any stability because people realized, hey, if we don't respect borders, it could lead to world war. And especially with the advent of nuclear weapons, that's the case. But if the US is really unwilling to defend Europe, and in this case it's Russia that's being aggressive, it's only a matter of time until China's like, okay, the US isn't going to do anything. Taiwan, you're mine now. And honestly, I also don't think long term China and Russia are going to be friendly because China lost territory to Russia before the 20th century, and they would like some of that back too. And I get the feeling 2 maximalist expansionist countries with nuclear weapons can't be good. And if the US isn't doing something with the most powerful arsenal in the world, a whole lot of people are going to make the decisions that lead us to the brink of world destruction. So I am actually worried. On the saving grace, though, the US president, I don't think, can pull out of NATO. That has to be, that's a treaty, so it requires the Senate to ratify leaving a treaty. So it's fortunately, there's at least some buffer. There's still plenty the fucker can do to mess things up, but at least something can slow it down.
Yeah, absolutely. And Trump is kind of discarding the Constitution right now, but he's not going to be in there forever, if for no other reason than because he's like 97 years old. When Hitler did all of his stuff, he was between 35 and 55, basically, or somewhere in that vicinity. He had a lot of time to go. And there isn't anybody that can take the reins from Trump, not to command the same control that Trump does. Don Jr. isn't as loved as Donald's. J.D. Vance, are they going to violate their constitutional oath for him? No. So I think once Trump kind of kicks it, if you will, things are going to change. Anyway, that's my take on it. From Mr. Barukwa, is that it? Number 10. $5. Owen, you should watch DBZ Abridged. Oh, I have. Should be able to watch the taste watch the taste of Anthony from your mouth and mine. I think you're like, yeah, absolutely. It's really funny. Although I'm not sure if it's something you can watch if you've never watched Dragon Ball Z before. I don't know. I would have to kind of run a test on that. But I think Abridged is really good. It's just a YouTube thing, I believe.
Okay. All right, and we now got $5 from Kate Space. Thank you for the show, guys. Owen, I've been following you and the Nutter Butters you talk about for a while. Always good to see you over here. Big smileys.
Appreciate that. Yes. Nutter Buttery of epic proportions, I always say. Thank you for watching. Oh, that was the last one.
All right. So, Owen, as the caller said, it was a pleasure having you on tonight. Always fun.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on.
And of course, the reason this show can exist is because the crew, the mods, the screeners, patrons, over here, making things happen. And don't forget, we got lots of other shows.